Hey guys! Tonight we are heading high into the Andes, where the air is thin enough to make your lungs feel like they've been stuffed with cotton balls, and the stars are so sharp they look like they might slice your retinas. You're trudging up a mountain path, half dizzy from the altitude, and there, hanging from the shoulder of a weary Inca runner, you see something that looks oddly like a tangled mop of yarn. But it isn't a mop. It's a quipu, a stringed record system made of chords, loops, and knots, humming silently with meaning. If you're expecting leather-bound ledgers or parchment scrolls, well, too bad. This empire ran on knots, and honestly, you probably wouldn't survive a week trying to decode one without training. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious to see where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The night smells of earth and smoke, carried on the wind from terraced fields below. In the moonlight, the mountains resemble giant staircases climbing to nowhere. Somewhere in those terraces, potatoes are being pulled from the soil, their skins gritty and cool. And somewhere else, a scribe of chords, called a quipucamayocs, is carefully knotting threads to capture the empire's pulse. You crouch near a small fire, warming your hands, and the first detail you notice is how ordinary these cords look. Just wool or cotton strings, twisted and dyed, dangling like tassels from a main cord. You'd probably dismiss them as decorations, like the fringe on your aunt's throw blanket, except for the way people treat them. Each quipu is guarded, carried with respect, and stored in places as carefully as any chest of silver. Mainstream historians will tell you this: the Inca built one of the largest empires on Earth without writing as we usually define it. No alphabets carved in stone, no long scrolls tucked in libraries. Instead, they used quipus as their primary tool for storing information. Taxes, census counts, harvest yields, even military rosters, knotted into strands of wool. Imagine paying your taxes today by mailing in a shoelace full of tangled knots. The IRS would have a field day. But here's a quirkier fact. Some quipus weren't purely administrative. There are theories, still debated, that certain chords might carry narrative stories, not just numbers. A knotted novel, if you will. Historians still argue whether these were books of string or merely math homework with fancy tassels. The evidence isn't conclusive, but just imagine a bedtime story whispered not in words, but in the placement of a knot. As the fire crackles, you picture an Inca runner, called a chasqui, bounding up stone paths with quipu slung across his chest. This empire stretched thousands of miles, from high glaciers to deserts that looked like bone. Messages and records had to move faster than a llama with a burr under its saddle. So, the Inca invented a relay system. Each chasqui sprinted to the next station, passing the cord like a hairy, knotted baton. Postal service by mountain goat impersonation. You lean back against a rock, watching sparks rise into the night, and you wonder how these cords could be so important. But here's where the genius lies. Each knot isn't random. Its size, type, direction, and placement all matter. Imagine if the way you tied your shoes decided whether you'd be recorded as alive or dead in the census. No pressure. Just triple-check that bow. And while we might think of knots as clumsy, like the eternal tangle of your headphones in 2009, these knots were elegant, precise. You could encode decimals, categories, even hierarchies, all with a twist and loop. Some chords dangled like families on a tree, branching out into subchords. It looked messy, but held an order invisible until explained. Now, here's where things get slippery. Quipus could be read differently depending on who held them. A trained keeper might glance at one and say, "Ah, 487 llamas grazed in this valley." Another might use the same set of chords to spin a tale of a king's journey. Were they spreadsheets? Were they sagas? Historians still argue whether quipus were a writing system or something we moderns simply don't have a category for. The night grows colder. and you wrap your cloak tighter. Somewhere above, a condor circles lazily, wings spread wider than a car. Below, the quipu-keeper ties another knot, as if casually recording the destiny of thousands. To you, it looks like stringcraft. To them, it's the difference between a well-fed empire and chaos. The empire itself felt so improbable. Roads cut across mountains that would make your thighs ache just looking at them, suspension bridges woven of grass, terraces carved like green staircases into rock. And among all this, the soft, unassuming chords of the quipu, small enough to tuck into a pouch, were the nervous system of it all. Quiet, unflashy, yet holding power. Kind of like that one USB cable you always lose, the one that charges literally everything important in your house. As you close your eyes, you can almost feel the threads sliding across your fingers. Soft alpaca, faintly lanolin-scented, each knot a tiny heartbeat of empire. You let the rhythm of it lull you. Overhand knot, figure-8 knot, half-hitch knot. A symphony of string in the high silence of the Andes. Dawn comes thin and blue, and you're already up with the llama herders, boots crunching frost that looks like sugar scattered by a careless cook. Your breath hangs in the air, ghostly and slow, while bells the size of walnuts tinkle somewhere on a slope above you. The herders move with practiced economy, quiet voices, long shadows, slings at their belts, thick wool ponchos smelling of smoke and lanolin. One of them, cheeks weathered into permanent laugh lines, squats beside a rock and unrolls a short cord with a few dangling strands. The morning inventory is about to begin, and the empire, as you learned last night, likes its numbers tidy. You kneel beside the herder to watch, and there it is again. That humble language of twists and loops. He pats a llama on the neck, murmurs a name you can't catch. Something like Cloudwalker, though you suspect it might translate to "don't spit on my poncho." And his fingers tie a quick knot. Then another llama, this one with a cocky ear tilt, earns another knot. The cord clicks softly as the strands shift, like a quiet abacus hidden in wool. You think of spreadsheets, but this one fits in a pocket and doesn't need charging. Take that, battery anxiety. A mainstream fact warms the scene. Andean pastoralists have managed llama and alpaca herds for millennia, using them not only as pack animals, but also for wool, meat, and dung fuel. Sustainable, efficient, and astonishingly well adapted to this altitude. Before the Inca knit their world together, earlier highland societies were already counting, sorting, and planning. Some scholars link the earliest quipu-like chords to pre-Inca cultures, possibly the Wari during the Middle Horizon centuries. So when you watch this herder count animals by knots, you're witnessing a deep groove in Andean memory, not a novelty of imperial bureaucracy. The herd shifts as sunlight spills over a ridge, turning their coats into a parade of beige, cream, and soft brown. You notice one strand on the herder's cord dyed a smoky gray, another a chestnut hue, and you realize he's sorting by type. Llamas on this pendant, alpacas on that one, maybe the Suri-haired drama queen on a strand of her own. He ties a larger knot for a full-grown animal, a smaller for a juvenile. A loop near the top marks the herd's home corral. It's like a family tree and a grocery list had a baby, and then decided to move to 12,000 feet. A quirky tidbit slips into the morning. The herder carries a bone whistle that mimics the calls of a condor. Not to summon birds, he says with a smirk, but to hush the herd. You give it a skeptical eyebrow until he gives the softest toot, and the llamas, who previously looked like they were plotting workplace mischief, settle into a docile shuffle. You file that trick away for your next team meeting. Forget PowerPoint. Bring a condor whistle. You follow the group through a gate of woven branches, stepping into a corral that crunches underfoot, and an elder gestures for you to hold the main cord. It's strangely calming, the weight of braid and knot, the faint oiliness of wool, and when the elder taps a pendant strand and says a number, you can feel the logic of placement. Units near the end, tens above, hundreds higher still. The decimal system is quietly alive in your hands. This is a mainstream fact we can bank. Inca Quipus encode place value numerals using knot types and positions on the pendant cords. You won't ace a calculus exam with it, but you could run an empire's tax office, which, to be fair, might require more stamina. The herders aren't just counting bodies. They're tracking births, noting which females are heavy with next season's crias, recording which males are too feisty for their own good. One herder ties a special knot with a little twist, his signature flourish, to mark an animal with a white blaze shaped like a crescent moon. Personal notation? Likely. Standardized across valleys? Maybe. Historians still argue whether these early local tally cords directly evolve into formal state quipus, or whether multiple recording traditions converged when the Inca expanded. Your fingers hover over that twisted knot, and you feel the tug of a system right on the edge of formalization. Half field notebook, half policy document. Breakfast happens as a kind of moving picnic. Someone hands you a rough cup of warm, salty broth, and you sip while the elder rolls the cord back up with surprising grace, like a magician vanishing a scarf. You realize that the cords themselves are memory devices, but the people are the processors. A quipucamayoc might inherit a mentor's chords the way a musician inherits an instrument, along with songs only the fingers know. You can almost hear yesterday's counts rustling in the fibers, today's knots landing beside them like quiet footsteps, tomorrow's plans waiting for a space to sit. One of the young herders grabs a small pouch and produces a handful of dyed threads. He shows you how the spin direction anchors meaning, S-twist or Z-twist, and how the pairing of fibers hints at category, animal kind, age, breeding group. He ties an overhand knot high on the pendant to mark a tally of 10, then 3 figure 8 knots below for the single digits. Your hands mimic the motion, clumsy at first, then steadier. You make a sloppy figure 8 that would embarrass any self-respecting accountant, and the young herder gives you a patient nod, the kind you give a toddler who has just helped you fold laundry. You walk with them up a slope, the sun fully awake now, the sky so clean it rings. The herd flows around you like a furry river, and every so often a herder peels off, loops back, then returns, tying another quick detail. You notice a pendant dedicated to wool yield, tiny knots spaced like stitches, while another strand seems to track pack duty, which llama carried salt, which carried maize, which carried the portable kitchen, which, based on the pot clanking, is clearly the one with the cardio. The cords fold logistics into a tactile diary, and you're surprised by how intuitive it feels after an hour. If you ever accused your shoelaces of being useless, you owe them an apology. A light joke flutters in with the dust. One llama gives you the classic llama side-eye, the universal sign for, I have seniority. You bow in return, because frankly you can't argue with that swagger. Another llama burps gently in your direction, which in llama language might be a cordial greeting, or a performance review. Either way, you take notes. The herders snicker. You're officially part of the morning's entertainment. You pause by a cairn of stones where 2 paths cross. A chasqui station sits nearby, just a small shelter, a gourd of water, a bundle of coca leaves. The elder sets the herd cord beside a more formal administrative quipu kept in a cloth wrap. With deft hands, he transfers totals from the local strand to the empire-grade record, reconciling numbers with the calm of someone who balances 1,000 tiny truths before lunch. This simple scene echoes a large reality. Household, village, province, empire, linked by cords, summarized by runners, remembered by specialists. Somewhere far off, a steward in Cusco will feel these knots tug his attention the way an email notification pings your brain at 2 a.m., except this ping arrives by legs and lungs. Yet even here, under the bright, busy morning, uncertainties nestle among certainties. Did the earliest herding cords already include narrative cues, colors for lineage stories, spacing for root memory, or were they purely numeric tools, later burdened with richer meaning? Historians still argue whether descriptive, even poetic functions traveled from local cords into state quipus as the Inca absorbed diverse peoples, or whether story quipus are more legend than practice. The debate doesn't stop the counting. Numbers click on, wool grows, crias wobble to their feet, the cord remembers. By midday, the elder ties one last pendant with a neat cluster that marks splayed hoof, an animal needing rest, And you realize these cords don't just archive the past, they nudge the day. Which animals to graze lower, which to keep apart, which to send with the salt caravan tomorrow. A to-do list braided into memory. You brush dust from your sleeves and think. The first accountants of this landscape walked with bells, slings, and strings. And if your own HR department had a mascot, it might well be a grumpy alpaca wearing a lanyard that says, "I run on knots." The herd settles in the shade, cud-chewing like a room full of thoughtful scholars, and you sit on a rounded stone that fits you as if carved. The elder places the cord in your hands again, a quiet ceremony, as if to say, "Feel how order can be soft, how planning can be woven, how tomorrow can be tied to today with nothing more than patience and fiber." The knots press lightly against your palm, and for a moment, you're convinced you could run inventory for a small mountain kingdom. Then, a young llama sneezes on your knee, and balance is restored. By afternoon, the wind softens, and someone places a bundle in your lap. A calm, weighty bouquet of cords. You ease it open. Alpaca wool brushes your fingers like a whisper, a little springy, a little buttery, the way good yarn always surprises you by being both cloud and backbone. Strands fall in a slow cascade, tawny, charcoal, pale bone, a shy green, a red so deep you half expect it to leave a blush on your skin. Your hands move, gently, the way you'd hold a sleepy cat, and you trace how each pendant cord joins the thicker main line. There's a logic to the attachment, a tidy discipline. The cords don't just dangle, they stand to attention. A herder's aunt, stern eyes, kind mouth, queen of the dye pots, sits beside you. From her pouch she draws slivers of plant bark and dry leaves, a pinch of something that looks like brown sugar, and a tiny gourd of crushed insects. You recognize the last from some documentary you half-watched at 3 a.m., cochineal. That famous Andean dye, raised on prickly pear cactus, the crimson heart of countless colonial textiles. The mainstream fact slides into place. The Inca and their neighbors mastered dyes long before Europeans marveled at Andean reds. Cochineal's carminic acid made shades from rose to wine dark, a palette later exported to dress European courts. You watch her tap a little powder into her palm as if seasoning soup, and you feel the color's history hum. Not every strand is alpaca. You rub a softer, cooler cord, cotton, likely brought up from lower valleys or the coast. Highland quipus often use camelid fiber, coastal ones cotton. Materials as maps. You run your thumb along a section where cotton merges with alpaca, and imagine a story hiding there. A census, taken on the high road by a traveler who had both worlds in one bundle. Historians still argue whether material choice encoded administrative levels, like this cotton pendant means coastal district, or simply reflected what was available in the workshop that day. You flip the cord and find a tiny splice where two fibers join, neat as a surgeon's stitch. The aunt nods, pleased you noticed. She takes a strip of bark, cole, she says, and explains through gestures how its bright yellow, coaxed with heat, can turn leaf green when married to indigo-like leaves. Blue is the shy guest at an Andean party, harder to obtain, more temperamental in the pot. Yet it's here, soft as a distant lake. The dye pots, she mimes, burble with mineral whispers, alum from certain clays, iron from dark muds, natural mordants that help color bite the fiber. She adds with a grin that nothing beats a good long simmer over a llama dung fire. There's your quirky tidbit, the Empire's color wheel turning thanks to very practical, very aromatic fuel. You pretend not to inhale too deeply. She pretends not to notice. You shift to another pendant and see two hues spiraled together, a barber's pole of meaning. Color might mark category, yellow for maize stores, red for military headcounts, green for fields, and the helical pairing could show intersections, like maize for soldiers. But you have to be careful. Your brain loves to find patterns where none were intended, like seeing faces in toast. A quipucamayoc arrives and places your fingers at the base of the pendant, indicating the reading path. He rolls the cord lightly, urging you to feel twist direction, S or Z spin, then the ply, then the knot type and its place along the length. The tactile grammar is shockingly rich, almost smug about it, like a minimalist who secretly owns 27 types of storage bins. You try to sort the bundle the way your laundry app sorts colors, if only you had one, and immediately mess up a gray that's really a green, that's really a yellow, over-dyed with something leafy. The aunt laughs, a good-natured little chuckle that says, "Yes, city person, color is complicated." She points to a soft brown that isn't dyed at all. Natural alpaca shade, prized for sturdiness. The cord smells faintly like clean hay and sun. She leans in, murmurs that certain quipus preferred undyed camelid for baseline categories, saving precious cochineal for flags that mattered. Historians still argue whether there was an empire-wide color code or a patchwork of regional conventions, a quilt of meaning sewn from many small looms. The debate wanders through museums and field notes, but the cords in your lap simply glow. You notice variation not just in hue, but in sheen. Some cords are lustrous, others matte. Some are tightly plied, others loose and airy. The main line, the primary cord, feels denser, a spine to which the pendants attach with half-hitches neat as calligraphy. You trace a subsidiary cord branching off a pendant, like a footnote hung on a footnote, and you get that little thrill you always feel when a form explains itself. A family census with a side note, a tax register with an exemption, a food tally with a special event addendum. If spreadsheets had little arms, they'd look like this. The quipu-kamayocs guides your touch to a pair of nearly identical reds. One leans toward brick, the other toward pomegranate. He wiggles his fingers, pay attention, and taps different knots on each. You get it. Color doesn't do all the work. It's a duet with structure. Color may call out a category, knots sing the numbers, twist direction whispers a modifier. Placement grounds it all in place value logic. It's like listening to a lullaby layered over a metronome, the two lines soothing your attention into focus. You smile because your brain is actually relaxing as it decodes. Who knew math could be a sleep aid? Shout out to your high school geometry teacher who absolutely knew. A joke sneaks in as you try to match a chord's green to maize. Your stomach growls, and you imagine a pendant dedicated to snacks. Official, state-sanctioned popcorn budgets encoded in mossy yarn. The ant, as if reading your mind, hands you a roasted corn kernel the size of a thumbnail. You crunch with reverence. If the empire tracked snack inventory, you vow to learn every knot type by sundown. On the edge of the bundle, a pale cotton pendant has little speckles, brown flecks that look like someone shook cinnamon over it. The ant makes a sprinkling gesture. Naturally colored cotton, she indicates, not bleached. A coastal voice in a highland choir. Cotton can take dye differently than alpaca, sometimes brighter, sometimes fussier. She mimics the way cotton swells in the bath, how alpaca drinks dye like tea. You picture vats steaming in a courtyard, dyers stirring with long sticks, colors deepening the way twilight deepens in a narrow valley. The heat of the imagined bath makes your eyelids heavy. You're not bored, you're steeping. Somewhere behind you a bell rings. A chasqui passes, all calves in focus, and you think of that condor whistle from the morning. You resist trying it on the dye master. Leading experts do not appreciate surprise bird calls while consulting on color theory. Instead, you return to the cords, noticing a single pendant braided from two fibers, one cotton, one alpaca. Some scholars suggest these hybrids might mark transactions across ecological zones, the exchange of coast and highland goods under the state's watchful eye. Historians still argue whether hybrid cords were a standard ledger for exchange routes or simply the artisan's flourish, the fun of a clever hand on a long afternoon. A shaft of late light lands on your wrist, warming the metal of your bracelet and the wool beneath it. You turn the whole bundle and catch a hidden pendant tucked behind others, dyed a quiet, smoky violet. It's not the flashy cochineal iron purple you've seen in museums, just a dusk-like hue that makes you think of potato flowers and the first shadows on terraces. You rub it between thumb and forefinger, and the fibers tighten under the skin, resilient, like the landscape itself. Somewhere a kettle murmurs. Somewhere a loom beats a soft wooden heartbeat. The cords settle as if they've heard bedtime called. Inventories will still be there tomorrow. Colors will still be true. And you, lucky guest that you are, Get to cradle the calm logic of a world tied together, literally, by patient hands. You breathe out, long and even. The chords exhale with you, or maybe that's just your imagination stretching its legs. Either way, the bundle feels lighter. Not because it weighs less, but because your fingers have learned a new alphabet of touch. Warm alpaca, cool cotton, quiet dye, loud red, gentle green, practical brown. You set the quipu down as if tucking in a child, smoothing a stray pendant, promising you'll remember where each color sleeps. Your thumbs find a rhythm, sliding down a pendant until the free end brushes your wrist. The quipucamayoc taps there, start here, and you feel where numbers live. Units closest to the tip, then tens above, hundreds above that, climbing toward the main cord like steps up a terrace. Place value in wool, simple and strict, like the mountain's own staircase. You breathe out and try to read. The lowest knot is a plump little pretzel, a tidy figure 8. That's one, the keeper murmurs, reserved for the unit's place. If the digit is something larger, 4 say, you'd get a long knot, its loops wrapped around the cord 4 times, a caterpillar of turns you can count by feel. For the higher orders, tens, hundreds, thousands, the digits are shown with single knots stacked in their place. 2 single knots in the tens zone means 20, 3 single knots in hundreds means 300. The system is a mainstream fact now. Anthropologists have mapped it for decades, but having it under your fingertips is different. 10 is not a concept here. It's a physical step upward. Your fingers climb, and the number grows taller. You test yourself with an example the keeper sets up. 3,204. Down at the tip, a long knot with 4 turns, your units. Above, nothing at all where tens should be. 0 recorded as a clean absence, a deliberate pause. Higher, 2 single knots for the hundreds. Higher still, 3 single knots for the thousands. You read it back, 4023, and the keeper nods, then flips your perspective. Remember to think and place value, not left to right like scribbles on paper. You repeat it the way you'd walk a staircase in the dusk. Feel the step, feel the pause, feel the next step. The silence at tens is a note of music, the rest that frames the melody. A quirky tidbit makes you smile. The keeper's index fingernail is slightly thickened, a tiny crescent of keratin perfected by years of pressing knots snug. He jokes that it's his accountant's callus, the Andean equivalent of a spreadsheet shortcut key. In the dim light, you can see faint grooves where nails have tightened cord for a lifetime, like tree rings you carry on your hands. Your own nails, soft with city living and snack budgets, recall that roasted corn, try to imitate the squeeze. You manage a feeble pinch that would not impress a tax auditor or a stubborn llama. You practice reading several pendants in sequence, a cord for maize stores, another for llama herds, say hi to your side-eyed friend, another for wool yield dyed in that cochineal red you learned to respect. Each pendant holds a column, and your hand moves down the bundle like a sleepy abacus run by touch. Sometimes a slightly thicker knot sits between place levels, a spacer, a gentle comma, so you don't count in the wrong zone. Sometimes a subsidiary cord dangles from a pendant with its own small number, a footnote to the main tally. Of those 3,204, the 204 are in storage down valley. The keeper translates with a glance and a tap. You're learning that arithmetic can have margins. He shows you calculating in the chords, the way you might in a ledger. To add 2 villages' potato totals, he lays their pendants side by side, fingers the unit's long knots first, counts turns, then adjusts the tens above if he crosses 10. Carrying happens with a little flourish, a loosened loop smoothed upward, a new single knot added at the tens level, like moving a bead across an invisible bar. Subtraction works in reverse. A tightened knot eased smaller, a single knot slipped away. You try not to think about untying tax revenue and get the sudden treacherous urge to undo everything. You put your hands firmly in your lap and inhale the lanolin instead. The keeper introduces a sum cord, a pendant whose knots equal the total of a cluster below it. He gathers 3 maize pendants, taps their sum cord above like a seasoned conductor, and you feel the harmony, individual voices, then the chorus. The order on the main chord matters. Categories are grouped by logic known to the office running this quipu, so a steward in Cusco could audit by re-adding groups, confident that the big knots line up with the little ones below, like terraces line up with the slope. There's comfort in this neatness. It's the same comfort as labeling your drawers socks, snacks, and miscellaneous secrets, except the empire actually remembers to file things consistently. Then comes the zero, the quietest teacher. He hands you a pendant with numbers at hundreds and thousands, nothing at tens and units. A record of rounded deliveries, perhaps. You run your thumb along the silent zones and realize the system's grace. It records presence and absence with equal eloquence. Even a blank is an instruction. The keeper pokes your condor whistle memories by whisper whistling through his teeth, ush, shh, to remind you that emptiness can be meaningful. You promise not to blow that literal whistle here. Die masters and accountants both deserve their piece. A mainstream anchor returns. Quipus operated with a decimal base. Yes, but not all numbers were equal. He shows a chord that marks people. Adults in one pendant, children in another, men, women, perhaps categories of service. You touch a pendant whose unit's knot is a figure 8 and ask, always one? Often, he says, but not everywhere. Some regions used long knots for units including 1. Others reserved the figure 8 for that special digit at the bottom. Historians still argue whether the figure 8's role was empire-wide standard or a convention's bouquet, with local schools teaching their own twist on the same math. The debate has the energy of two cooks arguing over whether you add salt before or after simmering. Either way, the soup tastes like numbers. He leans in with a chord that complicates your tidy box of rules. A pendant with unusually spaced knots, gaps wider than usual, as if breaths were built into the count. Sometimes, he suggests, spacing can mark thousands beyond the usual stack or signal an island value, a subtotal fenced off from the rest. Maybe it's an accounting style. Maybe it's a mnemonic flourish. You can almost hear your math teacher sighing in the background. Yes, patterns, but don't marry them before you meet their cousins. You tackle a quick exercise. The keeper flicks your attention to 3 pendants. 1. A maze tally of 8,657. 2. A maze tally of 2,341. 3. A sum chord that reads 10,998. You check by touch, feeling the long knot of 7 at the tip, the single knot of 4 above, the 3 at hundreds, 2 at thousands. Then glide to the 8,657 neighbor. Your brain does its sleepy arithmetic. 7 ply 1, 8 units. 5 ply 4 bore 9 tens. 6 ply 3, 9 hundreds. 8 plus 2, 10 thousands. Carry 1 to make 10,000. The sum chord's 10,000s is marked with one single knot at a higher zone, then 0 thousands, that eloquent silence, then 9 hundreds, 9 tens, 8 units. Your grin is ridiculous. You just audited an Inca spreadsheet with your fingertips. Someone should knit you a merit badge. A joke tiptoes in. You ask whether there's a pendant for office snacks consumed by auditors, and the keeper points at your own mouth with a deadpan so perfect you nearly surrender your last kernel of roasted corn. Fine. Call it a research expense. The last puzzle of the session is the direction of reading. On some chords, the twist angle and the slant of knots can be read toward the main chord. On others, the keeper demonstrates a convention away from the main chord, depending on workshop tradition. Your rule of thumb becomes literal. Let the spin and the knot's hitches guide your thumb's glide. You adopt a gentle pace, the kind you'd use to pet a cat who is absolutely judging you. The keeper's approval is a single nod, the Andean equivalent of a standing ovation. A final whisper of uncertainty floats in like evening fog. Were there non-decimal quipus, calendrical counts, ritual sequences, whose knots break the tidy base 10 rules to track lunar cycles or festival rotations? The keeper shrugs a maybe. Historians still argue whether some anomalous chords are special-purpose instruments or misread museum pieces, their context lost like a path after snowfall. Tonight, for your sleepy hands, place value is enough. You close your eyes and rehearse by touch in the dark. Tip for units, climb for tens, climb again for hundreds, fingers hovering where 0 lives. Figure 8 whispers 1, Long knots hum 2 through 9. Single knots in upper floors mark the grown-up digits. Some cords link families of numbers so no one gets lost. The cords cool a little in the evening air, the lanolin scent thinning to something mineral and kind. You return the bundle to its cloth, and it settles with a small, contented sigh. Or maybe that's you, stepping down from thousands to hundreds to tens to one, breath by breath, knot by knot. The keeper notices your hands relax and decides you're ready for people as well as knots. He beckons you into a shaded courtyard where other specialists sit cross-legged, each with a bundle wrapped in woven cloth. The air smells like wool, toasted maize, and a hint of eucalyptus. No speeches, no roll call, just the subtle ceremony of unwrapping. Threads spill like soft rain. You realize you're in the company of quipucamayocs, the knot keepers, whose job is as much performance as accounting. When administrators ask for numbers, these people won't hand over a spreadsheet. They'll let a whole town's memory run through their fingers. A mainstream anchor settles in your chest. Within Tawantinsuyu, the Inca realm, quipucamayocs served as trained officials, responsible for census data, tribute tallies, labor obligations, and storehouse inventories. They answered to provincial governors and ultimately to stewards in Cusco, the city that sits like a sun at the center of radiating roads. Some trained in noble schools, the Yachaywasi, where sons of the elite learned statecraft, ritual, and the disciplined handling of cords. You imagine homework here is a little different. Fewer essays, more knots, fewer red pens, more red dye. One elder taps the ground, and the room's rhythm changes. Each keeper lifts a cord, closes their eyes, and begins a murmured recitation, fingers traveling as voices drift. You're struck by the choreography. Left hand pinches the place, right hand counts the turns, breath marks the zeros. It looks like prayer, but the divinity is order. Your own fingers twitch, a rookie trying to follow the chords in a quiet band, hoping no one notices. A young keeper catches your eye and gives a tiny nod. Relax into the tempo. You do, and the courtyard's hum folds around you like a blanket. A quirky tidbit lands with a smile. One keeper pulls a small pouch of toasted quinoa and rubs a few grains between his fingers before reading, the way bowlers dust their hands with rosin. He explains, via pantomime, that it keeps the cords from snagging and gives just enough grip to feel fine differences in knots. Another produces a little pot of llama tallow, dabbing the tiniest smear along a careworn pendant so it glides. You're charmed to note that across the empire's backbone of mountains, data integrity sometimes comes down to snack crumbs and moisturizer. Your laptop suddenly feels under-accessorized. They show you how work moves through bodies as much as through time. A steward arrives with a question about tribute maize from 3 valleys. One keeper lays out the relevant cords, another rechecks some cords, a third prepares a clean pendant to receive a reconciliation mark. No single person owns the answer. Each holds a piece, and together they make a whole you can believe. You recognize the sensation, like watching an orchestra tune itself, or a kitchen crew assemble a dish without talking. Every movement deliberate, every pause loaded with purpose. The maize total emerges, not as a ta-da, but as a calm exhale. There it is. You ask how they remember so much. The elder smiles and taps his temple, then his chest, then the cords. Memory triangulates. Mind, heart, fiber. He hands you a training pendant strung with deliberately confusing knots. Same colors, similar numbers, deceptive spacings. You close your eyes and read. It's like a puzzle box narrated in your fingertips. When you get it right, he taps the ground twice. When you fumble, he taps once. Patient as a mountain. You think back to that condor whistle and wonder whether you should invent a don't panic version for your own brain. Probably not a marketable product, but your brain places a pre-order anyway. A mainstream fact returns with a clearer edge. Records weren't only numbers in a vacuum. These specialists compiled MITA labor obligations, the rotational public work that kept roads, terraces, and storehouses in good repair. A messenger might bring a cord from a district stating how many workers were sent for bridge maintenance. A quipucamayok would integrate it with food disbursement cords and road mileage cords, producing a tidy picture of who labored, where, and how they were fed. You glance toward the horizon and imagine a grass suspension bridge swaying between cliffs, kept alive by people whose names may now only exist as knots. The jokes arrive on time, like chaskis at a relay hut. First, you realize your own posture has become so straight that if someone balanced a pendant on your head, it would probably stay. Congratulations, you've unlocked Andean core strength without a gym membership. Second, when your stomach rumbles, a young keeper slides you a cup of chicha with such official solemnity you almost sign for it. Third, you ask whether there's a cord for number of times the outsider asked a silly question, and the elder taps an imaginary pendant heavy with knots. Fair. The room tilts toward mystery when a woman unwraps an old quipu, cotton cords, coastal in feel, with pendants grouped in patterns that don't look purely numeric. She doesn't recite numbers. She tells softly the sequence of a journey, names of places, offerings made, a birth, a storm. Her fingers rest on certain cords as if they're stones in a river she once crossed. Historians still argue whether narrative quipus existed widely, whether cords held phonetic or syllabic information, or operated as mnemonic scaffolds for trained reciters. The debate makes your scalp prickle. The woman's voice floats like smoke, and while you can't parse a single syllable of method, the story's weight is undeniable. Not everything intelligible has to be legible. They show you daily life logistics smuggled into string. A provincial storehouse's quipu documents beans, dried peppers, salt, sandals. Attached subsidiaries add notes for weather damage, rodent-proof walls, and future distributions. You recall that braided hybrid cord, cotton and alpaca, and see it here marking exchanges between coast and highlands, fish for potatoes, salt for wool. The cords make reciprocity visible, the way a river makes gravity visible. Your own to-do lists suddenly feel shy. Training, they explain, isn't only about accuracy, it's about consistency. Each workshop has its house style: preferred knot snugness, standard distances between place levels, signature ways of marking a subtotal. Apprentices mimic mentors until their fingers carry the style without thinking. You watch a master adjust a novice's hand by the smallest nudge, half a fingernail's breadth, and the knot lands exactly in the useful zone. It's poetry measured in millimeters. Questions, of course, thread through certainty like weft through warp. Were there standardized exams? Did Cusco issue templates for color categories? Historians still argue whether imperial edicts enforced a rigid system across provinces or whether the empire managed a patchwork, allowing regional dialects of knots so long as audits reconciled. The elder shrugs in a way that implies both could be true, depending on the century, the governor, the necessity. Empires are tidy until they aren't, and then they are again. Like your kitchen the morning after guests. You learn about safeguards. Two independent bundles might track the same tribute, each read by different keepers, then reconciled in public so errors or mischief can't hide. Messengers carry seals, woven markers, to show cords are untampered. Scribes, if you can call them that, don't live in towers. They live on roads, in plazas, wherever people and goods move. The cords are portable truth. A last, quiet scene settles into the courtyard. The woman with the coastal quipu places it in your hands. You feel the subtle grit of cotton, the warmth where fingers have polished fibers over years. She guides your hand to a pendant and hums a note, then another, matching the climb of knots. You realize she's teaching you to sing the staircase, units, tens, hundreds. So a melody becomes a mnemonic. Numbers become a lullaby. You hum back, uncertain at first, then steadier. The two of you weaving a small bridge of sound between mountains and sea. Outside, the light tilts toward honey. Someone feeds the little courtyard fire, and smoke threads up like a new pendant into sky. You think of the llama with seniority, of cochineal's wine-dark dye, of the elder's double tap when you get a puzzle right. You think of maize totals and road miles, of births and storms and offerings that maybe live nowhere anymore except in the pressure of knots and the breath of keepers. Your fingers rest on cotton, your palms remember alpaca, your breath marks the zeros. The courtyard hum continues, gentle as a fan's white noise, precise as a metronome set a little slower than your heartbeat. So it tugs you down into calm rather than revving you up. You leave your hands open and let the specialists finish their work around you. They are not in a hurry. Neither are the chords. The Empire's memory sits in woolly quiet, guarded by people whose calluses are as trustworthy as any signature. You feel sleep smoothing your thoughts like a hand smoothing fiber. And you let it, the way a knot lets itself tighten, not with fear, but with purpose. By the time the sun leans west, you can feel how the chords breathe with the Empire, like a slow, steady pulse running from valley to valley. A steward spreads a cloth on the plaza stones, lays 3 quipus side by side, and suddenly, you're not just holding colors and knots, you're holding taxes, labor, and armies, the practical trilogy that keeps mountains organized. Wind combs the flags. A dog naps in the shade of a storehouse wall. And you, honorary intern of the afternoon, learn what it means for a state to live by string. First, taxes. Tribute, if you want the mountain word. Not coins, but things. Maize, potatoes, cloth, chili peppers, salt, dried fish, coca leaves, copper tools. A quipucamayocs points to grouped pendants labeled by color and placement, and you can feel a province unfurl. 10 households here owe so many baskets of chuño, that freeze-dried potato magic. 20 households there owe a tally of woven blankets, and so on up the ladder. The mainstream fact lands with clean certainty. Inca administration sorted people into decimal units. Households in tens, 50s, hundreds, thousands, managed by officials whose responsibilities also stacked in tens. The Quipus mirror that hierarchy. There are some chords climbing like terraces toward the main line. You run your thumb along a pendant for maize and catch a subsidiary chord that says, stored at the eastern Kalka. You glance at the long, cool row of those beehive-like storehouses, Kalka, above the town, and understand how accounting becomes architecture. A quirky tidbit tickles the edge of the maize chord, a pendant apparently dedicated to sandals. The steward grins. Soldiers march through footwear the way toddlers march through snacks. The state issues rope-soled ushutas in dizzying quantities, and someone has to count them unless the army plans to storm a citadel in bare feet. Dramatic, yes. Practical, no. You picture an Inca quartermaster scowling at a mountain of sandals, while a young runner whistles his best condor impression to get the paperwork, well, string work, moving. You're tempted to add emergency sock budget to the ledger, but you keep your innovations to yourself. Mita comes next, the work tax, and the chords tighten around the idea like a belt. 1 quipu lists road crews. How many from each hamlet? How many days pledged? How much maize and chicha allocated to feed them at roadside tampus? The way stations that dot the kapaknyan like beads on a necklace. Names aren't spelled out here. Numbers speak for them, carefully, respectfully. Another quipu tracks bridge maintenance cycles for the grass suspension bridges, the ones that hum in the wind like giant harps. The schedule is knotted into time. This district repairs in planting season, that one after harvest. You imagine the old bridge master squinting at frayed fibers and muttering, "I told you no running," like every lifeguard you've ever met, only his pool is a canyon. Soldiers arrive, and the plaza shifts. Not a parade, exactly. More like a choreography of calm purpose. A captain kneels with a campaign quipu. Rations, slings, slingers, spare llama teams, a tally of copper-headed maces, and yes, more sandals. He consults with a quipucamayocs, who handles provincial numbers, and they reconcile figures like 2 cellists tuning to the same A. The mainstream anchor steadies you. Armies in this empire draw from those same decimal units, 10, 50, 100, so that logistics plug into a known map of people and duties. A sum chord above a cluster of rations pendants leaps out at you. You trace its knots and feel the total for a week's march. Your stomach growls on cue, as if to endorse the plan. Joke 1 saunters in, polite as a clerk. You realize the Inca had what amounts to HR, except their HR uses slings instead of memos, and measures performance in terraces fixed and bridges standing. Joke 2 pulls up a stool. You ask whether there's a pendant for number of times the captain rolled his eyes today. And the steward, without missing a beat, taps the sandal cord. Fair. Shoe logistics will test anyone's serenity. Joke 3 drifts in like afternoon shade. Those decimal units? Great for counting. Less great when you picture yourself jogging at altitude to meet your mita quota. Your lungs file a complaint with management. The condor whistle is denied. The steward leads you up to the kolkha, and the cool air inside kisses your face. Stone, shadow, a faint perfume of stored grain. The quipu for this cluster hangs near the entrance, attached to a peg, pendants grouped by bay and shelf. You run fingers along a maze total, and then its nested note, dedicated to road crews in the south. A similar structure records beans, dried peppers, salt. If accountants built cathedrals, they'd look like this. Domes of order, arches of calm repetition, spaces designed to make surplus breathe instead of spoil. Historians still argue whether each storehouse had its own local quipu that then fed into regional master cords, or whether some sites functioned mainly as transit hubs with abbreviated records. Either way, the cords stitch a supply chain into something you can touch. In a corner, you find a pendant that looks festive. Bright thread, subsidiary cords like streamers. The keeper explains, amused, that festivals and ritual obligations have their own accounting. Who provided dancers, who provided maize beer, who carried litters, who sang. The empire measured joy the way it measured labor, not to smother it, but to make sure joy arrived on time with enough cups to go around. Somewhere a brewer's cord ticks off batches of chicha, and somewhere a chorus leader's cord counts verses. Historians still argue whether specialized ritual quipus formed a separate class, part calendar, part playlist, or whether they're simply ordinary administrative cords dressed for a party. You decide both can be true. You've seen spreadsheets with confetti. Back in the plaza, an audit unfolds. Two quipucamayocs compare independent quipus for the same tribute. You listen to their soft recitations, units, tens, hundreds, and watch as a missing 10 surfaces. Not a scandal, just a knot slipped loose in travel. They correct it publicly, retie and seal the cord with a tiny braided marker. Transparency is not a buzzword here. It's a hand motion. The sum cords nod their approval. Your shoulders drop an inch, like the feeling when a missing receipt finally turns up in the pocket you swore you checked. As evening comes, the captain squares his campaign quipu and tucks it into a wrap. You ask the question that's probably kept curators and coders up at night. Did armies carry their own traveling quipus, updated daily like a logbook? Historians still argue whether field quipus were standard equipment or whether news and tallies flowed back through runners to central cords. The captain only smiles, taps the cords, taps his chest, taps the horizon. Memory moves where people move, his gesture says. You remember the coastal storyteller's hand guiding yours, numbers as lullaby, and decide the answer may be, again, both. The steward, generous to the end, shows a final pendant that feels almost alive. A warning cord, he jokes. If the maze dips below a certain threshold, a knot at a higher zone gets tied, an alert before hunger can whisper. The Empire can reroute caravans, retime labor, shift soldiers to hauling rather than fighting. You picture a night relay of chasqui, calves flashing in moonlight, condor whistles kept respectfully silent, quipus moving like veins under skin. Not glamorous, not loud, just steady. You sit on the low wall of the storehouse terrace and watch shadows stretch across terraces like dark blankets laid out to dry. Below you, sandals are counted, rations are weighed, labor days are tallied, bridges are scheduled for their haircuts, and an army chooses which valley path would be kindest to its lungs. Above you, the first star appears, sharp enough to scratch the blue. You hum the staircase song the coastal woman taught you. Units, tens, hundreds, and the sums settle into place like birds into evening perches. If power is often a shout, here it is a whisper measured in knots. Predictable, transparent, accountable enough that even a guest can read along, and you do. One last time, running a fingertip over a maze total, over the sandal cord, over a sum cord that feels particularly smug about balancing. The cords are warm where hands have warmed them. The state is warm where people have kept it so. You stand, joints cracking like polite applause, and promise your own scattered life. You'll remember this softness of order, how a world can be tied together and still breathe. After the audit winds down, you follow a keeper to a low wall, where the town's plaza spills into a slope of terraces, and beyond that, a valley shaped like a cupped hand. He spreads a quipu that looks different from the ones you've handled. Fewer categories, longer pendants, and a curious way the cords are grouped in bundles, then spaced, then bundled again. He doesn't say map, but your brain does. Your palms tingle. Somewhere your inner fourth grader who loved atlases sits up and straightens a tiny imaginary tie. He taps the thick main cord. This spine is the valley. A set of pendants hangs from one section. Riverside hamlets. Another cluster, set a handspan away, is the high fields with their stone-walled terraces. Subsidiary cords dangle like tributaries, some short, some long. The keeper places a pebble at one pendant and gestures to the river's curve below. You realize the spacing isn't arbitrary. It corresponds, loosely, not with a ruler's fussiness, to distance. Not to exact meters, but to, here's a long walk, here's a short stroll, here's a cliff that makes your calves file a complaint. Up on the main cord, between two clusters, a small space breathes. Hill, he says, and you smell eucalyptus in the notch of wind that always tugs at passes. A mainstream anchor steadies your thoughts. The Inca road system, the Capac-Yan, ran tens of thousands of kilometers, binding provinces from Ecuador down to Chile and Argentina with stone-paved highways, stairways, and rope bridges. Way stations, tampas, were placed a day's travel apart, sometimes less, provisioning runners, workers, and armies. You think of the sandal cord from earlier and grok the logistics. Roads aren't just lines on a landscape. They're promises of food, shelter, and directions. If there's a way to store those promises in yarn, these people would do it. Of course they would. He points to a long pendant with evenly spaced knots that climb in a tidy ladder. Tampas, you suspect. Each single knot a rest stop. He traces the intervals with a knuckle, closer together in steep stretches, farther apart across a gentle plain. Your fingers mimic the motion, and you can feel the land flatten and steepen under your touch. You've read topo maps with squiggly lines. This is a topo lullaby, sang in bumps and pauses. You grin, thinking there's probably a pendant somewhere for number of times travelers swear softly at altitude, and the keeper's lips twitch like he heard you. He shifts to a cluster of pendants dyed in earthy greens and browns, fields, terraces, irrigation channels. He pulls out a thin, braided subsidiary cord that runs between two pendants and knots a small bridge of its own between them. Canal, he says, and points to the shimmer of water far below. The braid glints slightly where oil from fingers has polished it over time. This is your quirky tidbit. Some mapping quipus, if you'll allow the term, bear tiny, deliberate braids or paired cords to mark water courses or road forks. Tactile cues for readers walking the valley in their heads. You stroke the braid and finally understand why the dye master's hands smelled of smoke and river clay. Maps live where the body lives. A pendant on the far left hangs heavy with knots, many at the tens level, grouped in little families. Storehouses, the keeper says, and then taps a higher knot that sits like a crown. Key. You lean closer. The key is actually a distinctive overhand with a twist, maybe a marker for a primary depot. It matches the bellies of stone beehives you saw earlier. This cord tells not only where the colcae are, but which ones belong to which cluster of fields, which ones feed which tampas. For a second, you picture your phone's map app quietly weeping with envy. He draws your attention to the main cord's twist. On this section, it's an S twist. On another, it's Z. He drags your finger across and then up, then across, as if to teach you a very gentle dance step. Up valley, down valley, he murmurs, and the spins suddenly become arrows, not just fibers. Historians still argue whether twist direction intentionally encoded cardinal orientation or simply reflected local spinning habits. The keeper, practical as always, uses it as a cue regardless. If it helps you remember, it's a map. He moves your hand over a pendant that changes spin halfway down. Pass, he says. Turn. Your inner GPS pings politely. A memory from the courtyard returns, the coastal storyteller humming the staircase of numbers. And now you hear a different song. The keeper hums a rising note for uphill, a falling one for downhill, marking his melody with a tap on each tampu knot. You follow along, and the tune hands you a valley. A bend in the river becomes a soft slide in pitch. A steep stairway becomes a bright, urgent climb. The long, flat pampa is a held note that makes your ribs loosen. You think the empire mapped in more than string. It mapped in breath. You test the system with a journey. From the plaza, he taps a pendant that stands for the first hill town, then traces a subsidiary chord to a little knot halfway up. Place of a small shrine, he says, with a calm that folds ritual into travel like sugar into warm water. 2 pendants over, a rope bridge. He taps the bridge knot, and you feel the quipu vibrate faintly in your palm, though you know it's just your imagination remembering the actual bridges humming in the wind. Then, a pendant with fewer tampu knots than you expected. A shortcut trail, he says, with a little grin that definitely has local knowledge energy. Joke 1 shuffles in wearing hiking boots. Absolutely, you're taking the shortcut. In your dreams. Your calves send a memo. Denied. You ask how precise these map chords get. He shrugs a scale invisible in the air, sometimes valley-sized, sometimes village-small. He shows a short quipu tied to the big one with a loop. An inset map, you realize, of fields within fields. The short chord's pendants are tiny, like the lace on a child's collar, and their knots are pinched so fine you need the accountant's callus to feel them. Historians still argue whether such inset chords were standardized attachments or ad hoc modules, spun up by clever hands for occasions, and then lost back into bundles when the need passed. Your instinct says modules, because the whole system hums with reuse and grace. You think of the sequé lines of Cusco, the ritual radii that scholars mapped centuries later, and ask, careful as a new knot, whether chords ever mirrored ritual geographies as well as road ones. The keeper's eyes warm with mischief. He taps a pendant dyed a faded yellow and traces 3 subsidiaries like rays. Sun, he says, pointing toward where Cusco would be far away, then sets a pebble by each ray and, without saying it, implies shrines. Historians still argue whether the Sikh system had tethered chords in practice, or whether the lines lived mostly in memory and procession. Your keeper doesn't argue. He hums the uphill note and taps your wrist where your pulse beats, as if to say, if you can feel it, it's real enough. A runner arrives, a chaski, with dust on his calves and a quipu that looks traveling tough. Cotton mane, alpaca pendants, a few broken ends repaired mid-journey, with knots that look like field stitches. He lays it beside the valley map and aligns a long pendant with the tampu ladder. Road closed, the captain says, arriving with that sandal-worn efficiency, pointing at a subsidiary cord tied across the ladder's middle like a rope barrier. Rock slide, his gestures say. The keeper calmly traces an alternate route, a higher pendant with more tampu knots. Harder walking, more rests. Joke 2 pops its head over the parapet. Congratulations, you're about to collect bonus frequent flyer miles. Redemption rate in roasted corn. You accept the terms. You notice something that makes you love this world more. A small, soft tassel attached at the end of the alternate route pendant, dyed a dusky purple like that shy cord you found in the dye master's lap. Warning, the captain offers. Not danger in the modern neon sense, but a courtesy. Extra cold at night, or scarce water, or condors particularly judgy here. You add a silent tassel in your mind to your own projects. May cause mild anxiety, apply snacks. As the sun angles lower, the keeper ties a new knot near the storehouse crown on the map cord. A delivery confirmed, a promise kept. He smooths the fiber like stroking a child's hair and tucks the quipu away. You ask because your map-loving heart must whether some quipus never left their posts, hung in a plaza for anyone to consult. He nods toward a sheltered niche where a public cord hangs, pendants thick with thumb polish. The townspeople brush it in passing like a good luck stone and to check the day's needs. Historians still argue whether such public quipus were common or the exception. Your fingertips say common enough to matter. Joke 3 wanders in gently. You imagine giving your phone the day off and instead checking bus routes by petting a tassel. Your phone, shivering in your pocket, files for emotional support status. The tassel, unbothered, sways in the evening breeze. The first star arrives, sharp as ever, and the valley grows that blue that almost tastes like mint. You breathe the higher, cooler note uphill and the lower, longer note downhill. And your own breath becomes a tiny map. You think of that math you hummed, the staircase of units, tens, hundreds, and let it blend with this landscape melody. Numbers and distances fold into each other like two halves of a woven pattern finally meeting. You're not memorizing. You're inhabiting. Roads, tampas, bridges, canals, storehouses. Threads once scattered now gather in your mind like a neat bundle tied with a small, confident knot. You promise yourself, very softly, to remember this when your own days feel like they've lost the path. Leave a space where the hill is, add a tassel to warn your future self of the cold, bundle what belongs together, hum your steps, and trust that a sum chord, somewhere above you, keeps the whole from coming apart. By the time the lamps are lit in the plaza, you've drifted from armies and roads to the soft gravity of kitchens and courtyards, the sort of places where a day really happens. A woman in a brown shawl sits on a low stool with a baby snoozing against her chest and a basket of potatoes at her feet. Beside the basket rests a modest quipu, not showy, not crimson and gold, just practical browns and greens, the colors of dinner and garden soil. She pats the baby, pats the potatoes, and then, with the same calm rhythm, pats the pendant she's about to update. You lean close and realize you're about to watch a household run on knots. She lifts one pendant and touches a neat cluster of single knots stacked in the hundreds zone. Not hundreds of potatoes, a girl can dream, but a running count of chuño, those freeze-dried potatoes made by night frost and daylight pressing. The mainstream fact settles like a blanket on your shoulders. Andean households preserved potatoes as chuño to store calories for months or years, a cornerstone of food security that linked neatly with the state's kolkha storehouses. The quipu keeps track not only of what's on hand, but what's reserved for the mita season, what's owed to the community granary, and what's promised to a sister's wedding. You can almost taste the future meals snug inside those knots. A neighbor arrives with a clay jar whose earthy smell gives away its calling. Chicha, that maize beer that holds together work crews, festivals, and the kinds of conversations people remember sweetly. A second cord appears, short, purposeful, with pendants for batches brewed, cups served, and a tiny subsidiary that the woman taps while pointing to a younger cousin. "Learning to stir," her gesture says. You grin at the idea that apprentice brewers get monitored with the same calm precision as bridge crews. Joke 1 saunters in wearing an apron. If your roommate's turn to brew tea were tracked by quipu, the kettle would probably never sulk empty again. The courtyard smells like toasted corn and eucalyptus smoke. A boy kneels with a different cord and frowns with theatrical seriousness as he counts guinea pigs darting between warm stones. His pendant has a long knot with 5 turns, then 2 single knots above, and you realize he's recorded the herd-in-place value just as cleanly as the steward did for sandals. This home has its own portfolio: food animals, stored tubers, woven cloth waiting to be traded at market. The boy glances up to make sure you saw his precision, the way a junior accountant hopes you notice the columns lining up. You give him the solemn thumbs up of a peer reviewer and he beams. A quirky tidbit scampers in with the guinea pigs. The boy's mother shows you a softly frayed pendant that's been rubbed smooth at one place. "Weather," she mimes, pointing to the sky, then to a shallow groove. On dry weeks, she adds a spacer knot there, a tiny meteorological memo so she remembers why the chicha yield was low, or why the potato skin's toughened. It's a household hack scribbled in fiber, the Andean equivalent of writing rain check in the corner of your planner, only your planner is a small, polite constellation of chords. You feel a sudden urge to rename your calendar the Great Household Quipu and start tying bows on it. At the doorway, an elder eases down with a longer cord swaddled in cloth the way you'd wrap a sleeping infant. This one isn't about food, it's about people. He points to a pendant, taps a single knot, then points at the baby sleeping against his daughter's chest. Birth recorded, not with fanfare, but with a neat warmth that says, "You belong now." You. Another pendant carries a different pattern for marriages. 2 subsidiary cords branching like joined hands, and further along, a sober cluster for deaths. You remember the courtyard choir of keepers and feel the continuity. The same staircase of units, tens, hundreds, applied here to the most ordinary, most luminous parts of life. Historians still argue whether household-level quipus like these formed an empire-wide civil register, or whether village officials consolidated such events into periodic state cords. But the elders' hands don't argue. They record. Someone fetches a small stool for you, because reading life is not a rush job. The elder places your fingers on a pendant that marks woven cloth, yanapas, helper gifts, owed to a cousin's family who assisted at harvest. The number is small, the cord humble, but the logic sings. Reciprocity tracked so gratitude doesn't evaporate under the wind of tomorrow's chores. You think of that hybrid cotton alpaca cord from earlier, and see how exchange is an everyday choreography, not just a state ballet. Joke 2 pokes its head around your memory. If your friends had a quipu for "I'll get the next coffee," your caffeine future would be safe from sudden amnesia. The evening cools, and with it the colors deepen. Greens look greener, browns look like dark chocolate. Someone adds a tassel to the chicha cord. Purple, like the cautious tassel you saw marking an icy detour in the map Quipu. Except here the tassel means, set aside for feast day. The woman smiles at your raised eyebrows and taps the baby, then the tassel, then the calendar star she's drawn with her fingertip in dust. A season will turn. Songs will rise. Cups will clink. The cord already knows. Historians still argue whether such ritual earmarks were standardized household practice or friendly improvisations that state officials tolerated so long as tribute arrived on time, but this courtyard needs no memo to justify its joy. On a low shelf sits a basket of maize cobs, each one a different size, a quiet rainbow of yellows. You watch as the woman plucks one cobby overachiever for seed and ties a little training pendant with a single smug knot. You suppress a laugh. You've met spreadsheets with that exact energy. She notices your expression and, with sympathetic mischief, taps your temple. Then the pendant, like, "Yes, we also keep a list of bossy vegetables." Joke 3 tiptoes and slippers. Somewhere there's a pendant titled Hero Potato. Mainstream truth takes a seat at the circle. The Inca relied on communal land, allocated in plots often measured in tupu, to support households. Officials used census quipus to track who received what area, adjusted for family size and changing circumstances. That system only works when information flows up from courtyards like this. You feel the upward tug. Births, marriages, deaths, harvests, all traveling from shawl-wrapped bundles to provincial cords to some cords that become policy. Those lofty storehouses you visited earlier are, in the end, answerable to baskets on floors and babies in slings. You ask the elder, a gesture, a question in your eyes, whether names live on these cords. He tilts his head, then traces a small motif on a pendant. A distinctive knot and spacing he uses only for a particular grandson. It's not an alphabet, not in the way you're trained to expect. It's a mnemonic signpost only his hands and the boy's mother would know. Historians still argue whether Quipus ever encoded phonetic or syllabic information broadly, whether string could carry the sound of a name, or whether names lived in trained memory anchored to these tactile cues. In this courtyard, the answer looks like a smile and a patient tap on a familiar knot. The boy returns with his guinea pig report, and the elder invites him to audit the household chicha cord. He puffs up and solemnly counts the unit's long knot at the tip. then the tens above. When he finishes, the elder taps twice on the stone, your favorite signal for correct, and the boy glows as if he'd just balanced the empire. Skill travels by warmth here, lap to lap, chord to chord, breath to breath. You hear again the coastal woman's melody for place values, and catch the elder humming something similar as he closes the household bundle. A soft staircase song that tucks the evening in. Before you leave, the woman pulls a cord from a niche you would have missed, a tiny, travel-sized quipu with just 2 pendants. One for salt, one for peppers. Market shopping list, she pantomimes, with a shrug that says, "If I don't write it down, I'll come back with 6 stories and no salt." You nod so hard your neck creaks. The cord's smallness makes it dear. You decide you love a world where even errands can be gentled into knots. A breeze threads the courtyard, cool but kind. Smoke climbs. Cups clink. Somewhere, a condor might be critiquing someone's posture. Somewhere, a distant bridge hums. You feel a soft certainty. The same hands that count soldiers count potatoes. The same place value staircase that maps Tampus marks births. The same tassel that warns of icy passes flags a future party. The empire may stride in sandals across mountain roads, but it also curls on stools by evening fires, where memory is domestic, and policy begins with a baby's sigh and a mother's quiet nod. Night leans in, and the plaza thins to a hush that makes whispers feel bigger than they are. You step toward a low doorway where 2 men sit with their knees nearly touching, a bundle of cords between them, and the kind of careful silence that says, "This isn't about maze totals." One man is a runner you recognize by those chaski calves. The other wears a plain cloak with edges just a little too neat, the unofficial uniform of someone important, pretending not to be. He loosens the bundle. The cords look ordinary, browns, a sober red, a cautious green, but the way they're grouped, the way his thumb hovers above a pendant before landing, tells you that you are not watching groceries get counted. You are watching secrets try on wool. The mainstream anchor lands first, steady as a tampu fire. Spanish officials, baffled by a state that ran on string and uneasy with anything they couldn't read themselves, confiscated and burned quipus in many regions after the conquest. Some priests saw them as idolatrous conduits. Some governors feared they were ledgers for resistance. Edicts ordered their destruction, though not everywhere and not all at once. Meanwhile, runners still existed, roads still ran, people still had things to say. You imagine a colonial officer squinting at a pendant the way you squint at your bank's 2-factor authentication, except his text message is a knot he can neither open nor ignore. The chasqui folds the cord so a particular pendant sits in the center of his palm. The captain, let's call him that even if his cloak insists he's a nobody, touches that pendant, then a second, then a braided subsidiary between them. Not numbers. Sequence. You feel it the way you felt the map cord earlier, but with a different gravity. Not Tampus and bridges, but meeting places and dates that aren't dates. Tomorrow might be the second knot above the spacer, and bring 5 might be a long knot with 5 turns next to red. The condor whistle in your memory clears its throat and decides to stay respectfully silent. A quirky tidbit slips out with the breath. The chasqui didn't mean to let go. Pinned to the bundle is the tiniest woven tassel, dyed purple, like the warning tassel you saw for icy roots. Only here the tassel smells faintly of smoke and crushed coca leaf. He grins, sheepish, and mimics rubbing it under his nose. You get it. Sent as a private proof. If a cord that's supposed to smell like eucalyptus arrives smelling like pond, someone switched bundles. Secret seals in perfume and pollen, not wax. The ingenuity is so cozy, you want to knit it a sweater. They demonstrate a second layer of hush. The cord's spin shifts, S to Z, halfway along a pendant. Earlier, that meant up valley and down valley to your map brain. Here it's a pivot, a read this, but now in the other key. The captain taps the first half with 2 fingers, public tally, the second with 1, private addendum. Anyone watching sees maize or sandals. A friend watching sees, the sandals are for a bridge crew that is not actually repairing a bridge. Historians still argue whether Quipus ever encoded syllables or phonetic values robustly enough to spell names and verbs, or whether they served as mnemonic triggers, tactile outlines for trained minds. Your gut, leaning against a cool wall at midnight, says this: you can hide a plan in a pattern without writing the word plan. The chasqui ties a new knot with the peculiar calm of people who rehearse even their rebellion. He slides a long knot to the unit zone and changes its snugness by the smallest pinch, the accountant's callus earning its pay. The captain nods once. That pressure means maybe. He loosens it a hair. If safe. They tap a spacer above tens and after a breath add a single knot there. A date? A rendezvous time? Or just a remember to bring chicha because meetings go better that way? Joke one pads and wearing soft sandals. Secret or not, every gathering goes better with snacks. You learn how stealth sits inside normal. A public chord might track tribute llamas. A private reading might notice that every third pendant has a subsidiary of exactly 2 knots. Code for counted but held back. In another chord, the color sequence red, green, yellow repeats like a drumbeat. To an outsider, it's charming die work. To insiders, it's locations in a 3-stop loop. Somewhere a Spanish scribe writes chord of household inventory, and meanwhile a valley breathes easier because somebody knows which bend in the river will host a conversation after moonrise. Mainstream truth keeps its place. Messengers, chasquis, ran a relay across the empire along that kapak nyan you've been humming in your head, swapping bundles at Tampus, memorizing phrases, carrying coca leaves and conch shells, pututus, for signals. The relay didn't vanish with the conquest. Humans keep using roads that work. A colonial decree can kneel on a plaza. It can't kneel on 25,000 kilometers of habit. Joke 2 peeks in wearing a bureaucrat's hat. Imagine trying to turn off calves. Good luck. Those legs have opinions. You ask, quietly, because the walls seem to be listening, whether messengers ever braided decoys, cords that read perfectly as grain ledgers while hiding the letter of a conspiracy. The captain shrugs, then smiles with every tooth hidden, a very Andean smile that says yes without testifying. He shows you a pendant with alternating twist direction in tiny, fussy sections you'd never notice without practice. Each alternation marks a word boundary, he indicates, while the length of the section signals which memorized term to sing. It's not alphabet, not like the heavy, scratchy books the friars carry. It's more like a playlist with uneven pauses. Historians still argue whether such epistolary quipus existed widely or only rarely. A few communities centuries later have guarded chords they say are letters between leaders. Whether those are common or singular, you feel the possibility purr under your fingers. The chasqui rewraps the bundle the exact way he unwrapped it. Loose loop, snug tuck, a knot that looks casual but absolutely isn't. He tucks it into a woven chuspa at his waist, beside coca leaves and a sliver of dried meat. You remember the household shopping list quipu and grin at the thought that market lists and secret plans travel in the same pocket. Joke 3 arrives wearing an innocent face. If questioned, you can always claim your urgent message is about peppers, which, to be fair, can be urgent. Still, the line between clever and dangerous is thin. You think of priests who demanded cords and burned them, of scribes who declared any knotted thing a devil's rosary. You picture a keeper's hands, the ones you watched sing numbers, held still in a courtyard while an official frowns. Fear is a clumsy reader. The captain sees your face go serious and taps the tassel again, a reminder that even warnings can be gentle. Quiet, he mouths. You are. The plaza's breath is slow. The stars would approve of any code that fits into their patient geometry. He offers you a quick drill. He taps 3 pendants in a rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. And then a long pause, while his thumb rests at the spacer. You answer, by pure instinct now, with the household cadence you've learned. Tomorrow, 2, bring. He smiles, not because you're right, who knows whether you are, but because your fingers finally stopped trying to force the chord into alphabet and let it remain itself. A system where absence speaks, where pressure and distance are syllables, where a tassel's perfume can co-sign the truth. Uncertainties stack like single knots in the 100 zone, clean but unsolved. Did rebels ever coordinate across provinces primarily by quipu? Or were chords always paired with whispered words and trusted faces? Historians still argue whether certain colonial-era bundles now in museums are letters of revolt or later mnemonic aids reinterpreted under romance. Your own sense, lulled by wool and night, floats between both. Humans hedge their bets. Say it aloud where you must. Tie it where you can. The captain tightens the final wrap and slides the bundle back to the chassis. The runner takes a breath through his teeth, the tiniest condor whistle, and the two men look like anyone else on any other night. Neighbor and nephew, discussing sandals or beer or the price of peppers. The road waits. So does a tampu with a cool gourd of water. So do the feet that will do the remembering. You watch the runner fade into the dark, his steps a private metronome. You sit back against the wall and notice your own hands repeating the rhythm on your knee. Tap, 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 tap. Pause. It's ridiculous and tender, the way a lullaby becomes a habit your bones hum without permission. Across the plaza, someone laughs softly. A dog sighs. A pot lid clinks. You breathe. You remember the warning tassel on the icy detour, the sandal cord that kept armies honest, the household pendant that saved Chunyo for feast day. The chords you've met aren't loud, they don't shout. But they carry, patiently, exactly as far as a whisper needs to go. You wake to color before you wake to sound. The plaza has that pearly dawn light that makes everything look freshly invented, and the first thing your eyes catch is a row of quipus laid out like a painter's swatchbook. Yellows, reds, greens, browns, and a few stubborn blues flexing their rarity. A keeper beckons you closer and spreads one bundle with deliberate care, his fingertips hovering over hues the way a good cook hovers over spices. He touches a yellow pendant and the air seems to warm a degree, as if a small sun has joined the morning. Yellow first. He taps the pendant and then gestures toward a heap of hammered discs glinting from a temple storehouse. Gold, the sun's sweat, a thing the Inca valued for ritual shine rather than coinage. The mainstream fact lands cleanly. The Inca did not use precious metals as currency. Gold and silver held sacred and status meanings, while accounting moved through goods and labor, not coins. On some chords, yellow flags are linked to temple inventories, offerings, regalia, sun discs, while others point to maize stores, because yellow, practical as always, also looks like corn. He straightens a subsidiary cord between a gold-coated pendant and a maize-coated one, and gives you a conspiratorial smile, as if to say, categories are tidy until reality insists on sharing a color. Your job, future reader of knots, is context. Now red. He lifts a pendant the color of ripe cochineal, a red that glows like a pomegranate when the light hits it just so, and traces a short, emphatic line with his nail. Warriors, he mouths, and then, with the same cord, taps another zone. Tribute cloth, especially the richly dyed garments that moved through the state. Red is attention. Red is priority. Red says, don't lose this in the paperwork, which, to be fair, is string work, but still. You remember the sandal cord from the army quipu and imagine a red flag woven into the ledger for urgent, replace souls before the captain invents new swear words. Joke 1 strolls in, well behaved. Red is the highlighter marker of the Andes, and no one will stop you if you color code your snack budget with it too. Green arrives like a deep breath. He sets your fingers on a pendant dyed a leafy tone, and then opens his palm toward terraces stepping down the slope, maize and fields and their watered lifelines. Green marks agricultural categories in plenty of Quipus, maize counts, irrigation canals, seed reserves, and it's hard not to feel your shoulders drop when you touch it, the way a garden tugs anxiety back down to soil. He draws your hand to a braided subsidiary between two greens, the canal line, and you feel the cool logic of water move through the cord. Memory doesn't only record food, it irrigates it. He lines up a few pendants like a tidy rainbow and starts pairing colors with knot types, teaching you the duet you learned among dyes but now with a lexicon of associations. Yellow plus long knot clusters near the tens? Could be maize sacks by lot. Red plus single knots up high? Companies of fighters counted in hundreds. Brown, undyed alpaca, anchoring the sensible things. Tools, pack animals, cloth not destined for ceremony. And then a blue so shy you barely see it until he rotates the cord and the dawn kisses it into existence. Likely indigo-like hues coaxed from rare plants or trade, used sparingly for high-status categories. Historians still argue whether there were empire-wide, rigid color codes, or whether workshops held house dialects of color that auditors could translate by cross-checking sums and subsidiary cues. You run your thumb along a green and think, it's probably both. Standards where standards help, local flavors where the land insists. A quirky tidbit lands like a petal. The keeper produces a little pouch, not of dye, but of dried marigold heads. Flowers for a yellow that leans golden and smells faintly of sunshine when the pot steams. He pantomimes dipping a cord, then sniffing it after drying. If the quipu arrives with a hint of marigold, you know which workshop made it. If it smells like smoke and eucalyptus, another. Scent as provenance. You picture a future curator sticking their nose in a display case, and it's not the worst museum habit you've imagined. Joke 2 pads by, floral and bashful. Yes, your ledger wears cologne. The keeper lays a cord where colors alternate in a strict pattern. Yellow, green, red, brown, repeat. And then wraps a knuckle lightly above a higher knot that sits like a title. Category clusters, he indicates, or perhaps a schedule. Sewing, green. Stockpiling, yellow. Levy for service, red. Tools issued, brown. Then back again. You recall the map Quipus rhythm of Tampus, and think of this as a calendar embodied in string, a weekly planner for a province. Historians still argue whether some color cycles functioned as calendars tied to ritual rounds, planting feasts, sun festivals, or if auditors just liked their ledgers with a visual beat to keep fingers honest. Either way, your eyes begin to anticipate the next color, and it's as soothing as counting your steps. He shows you how colors whisper subtext. A sober brown pendant suddenly sports a tiny teardrop of red wool tied at its base. A reminder that these tools were issued to a garrison, not a road crew. A green pendant tagged by a thin yellow subsidiary. Seed maize, not eating maize. A yellow that goes pale for 2 spans, then bright again. A drought year flagged in a gradient. You run your thumb over that fading, and imagine the household pendant you saw with its weather groove. Across registers, empire, town, courtyard, the same human urge to annotate keeps the story honest. Blue returns to be fussy. The keeper apologizes to it with a grin. Blue is complicated in these highlands, more coastal and traded, more special occasion than everyday bean counting. He taps a pair of cotton pendants, sea breeze pale, and then places your hand over a wool one stained to a smoky blue-gray. Coastal account? Highland account about coastal goods? Historians still argue whether blue ever served as a marker for maritime or foreign categories, or whether its rarity made it too precious for mundane labels. The cord does not confess. It only glows shyly and enjoys being admired. You ask the question color inevitably invites. What happens when meanings collide? Yellow for gold and yellow for maize. Red for warriors and red for rich cloth. Green for fields and green for tribute coca. He answers with patience and practice. Position, knot type, spin, and adjacency do the heavy lifting. Color is a flag, not a sentence. A regiment's red exists in the people cluster. A cloth levy's red lives with textiles. 2 yellows separated by a spacer tell different truths. A yellow braided to a green tells a third truth. Maize for offering, perhaps. Your mind eases into it, the way you finally understand the difference between 2 friends with the same name once you know their laugh. Joke 3 steps in holding a paint chip fan. You confess that at home you once painted a wall maize, and your friend called it nervous banana. The keeper, who has never met your walls, is generous enough to laugh anyway. He taps your shoulder as if to say, every system needs a little humor glued in between the categories so the joints don't creak. Mainstream certainty adds a quiet coda. Some surviving quipus show consistent pairings. Green with maize tallies near storehouses. red with military headcounts, yellow with both maze and ritual inventories, suggesting shared conventions across distances, at least where auditors traveled and trained. Yet chords from different valleys carry their own little idioms, braid widths, preferred shades, local plant dyes, like accents you can hear once you listen for them. Historians still argue whether Cusco issued color edicts as strictly as it issued labor quotas. The safest reading is that color helped memory along a framework of knots, and that framework did the legal work. Before the cords are rewrapped, the keeper does something ceremonial but small. He ties a fresh, bright green tassel at the end of a field accounts cluster. "Rain good," he says, eyes on the sky, and for a heartbeat the entire plaza feels like it nods. You think of the purple warning tassel for icy routes, the purple scent seal for secret messages, the purple feast day tag on the household chicha cord. Tassels are emojis you can touch. Simple, soft, precise. The sun edges higher, turning the yellow pendants into little lanterns. You close your eyes and rehearse what color taught you. Yellow warms, red insists, green steadies, blue surprises, brown grounds. You remember cochineal's wine-dark hum, marigold's shy perfume, the faint mineral tang of copper tools counted under a sober brown. Somewhere a bridge hums, somewhere a condor judges posture, somewhere sandals are once again being tallied. And here, on a cloth in the sun, color does what it does best. It makes memory stick without shouting. You breathe in, slow as a knot tightened with care, and let the palette settle under your skin. By late morning, the calm of colors gives way to a scrape of boots on stone. Metal tips, a jangle that doesn't belong to sandals. You feel the plaza tighten, the way air goes still before rain. Men in quilted cotton and steel caps stride in with a priest at their center, black robe lifting like a raven's wing in the mountain wind. They're carrying what looks like authority. Paper, a seal, a cross, and the tired swagger of travelers who think maps end where their language does. You edge to the side, soft as a shadow, while a quipucamayocs gathers his bundles with the same protectiveness you saw in the courtyard, memory to chest, thumbs on knots, breath steady. A soldier grabs a cord, frowns as if it should confess in Spanish, and gives it a shake. The knots don't translate. He scowls harder, because numbers that won't talk are rude. The priest steps forward, fingers surprisingly gentle on the wool. He knows the object. He's heard of it, maybe even written about it. A mainstream anchor lands. Some Spanish chroniclers, José de Acosta among them, described Quipus as the Andean way of counting and remembering, useful for accounts but suspect for idolatry. Later, extirpators like Pablo José de Arriaga urged their destruction in campaigns against idolatries. Paper liked order. Fire liked certainty. Wool had the misfortune of being flammable and difficult to interrogate. The plaza becomes a small theater of confusion. The priest asks what the cords say. The keeper, voice steady, explains May's totals, births, mid-a-days served. His thumbs move as he speaks, every knot a soft punctuation mark. The priest nods at the practical parts, then narrows his eyes at a pendant dyed red, then one with a tassel. "These," he murmurs, "may hold other things." He doesn't mean snacks. He means prayers not sanctioned, stories that never met a page. The captain with steel cap shrugs toward the storehouse. Burn the lot, easier all around. You think of the sandal cord, the public map cord, the household chicha tassel. Whole lives, quietly 12-knotted, threatened by a shrug. They make a small pyre. The first bundles to go are those from the temple store. Yellow pendants warm in the smoke like tiny suns. A keeper reaches out in reflex and stops, fingers curling back to his chest with a restraint that makes your own throat go tight. The wool tightens as it burns, turns black, then tatters. Ash lifts like moths. You imagine the numbers turning to weather. Joke 1 appears with soft shoes and a sad smile. If your spreadsheets ever burst into flames, you'd at least finally remember what was on them. No? Too soon. You slide the joke back into your pocket and let the smoke drift. Not everything goes into the fire. The priest orders a few cords set aside. Examples, he calls them. Evidence. He quizzes the keeper, who hums the staircase melody you learned in the courtyard. Units, tens, hundreds, and for a moment the priest seems almost relieved that logic lives here. He asks whether names can be written in knots. The keeper taps a pendant with a personal spacing flourish, the grandson knot you saw in the household, and the priest's mouth tightens. Confession, he says, suddenly bright, and produces his own cord. A confession quipu, he explains briskly, with pendants for sins. He demonstrates how a penitent could confess with touches, one knot for missed mass, another for gossip, another for the kind of romance the priest says quickly, and you pretend not to fully understand before bedtime. This is your quirky tidbit. In some colonial parishes, priests experimented with tally cords to guide or record confession and catechism, aiming to replace Andean memory with church-sanctioned knots. It's a little like swapping playlists, while insisting the new songs are better for your soul. A soldier jabs a finger at a purple tasseled pendant and demands its meaning. Warning, the keeper says, then adds, icy passes. The soldier rolls his eyes. Mountains are just hills until they sit on your lungs, and declares purple suspicious anyway. The priest, torn between caution and curiosity, has the tassel kept. He asks whether the cords ever carry letters. You feel the chasqui from last night pass behind your thoughts like a shadow across a wall. Historians still argue whether colonial letter quipus were widespread or rare curiosities, whether rebels and local leaders used structured knot patterns to prompt memorized messages, or whether later communities reimagined older cords as letters in the telling. The priest doesn't cite scholars, he cites smoke. 2 more bundles go to the fire. In the midst of this, a clerk sits with paper and ink, trying to copy the content of a maze cord into columns. He mutters at zeros that look like air, squints at a spacer that feels like a comma his pen doesn't have, and dips his quill so often he frets the feather will go bald. You angle to see his paper, and it's oddly comforting. Rows, totals, a sum written carefully at the bottom as if it were a prayer. Paper and string are not enemies. They simply speak with different mouths. Joke 2 clears its throat. You've seen copy-paste disasters in your own life. Imagine doing import from Quipus at altitude with a grumpy goose feather. A woman steps forward, the dye master's kin by the set of her shoulders, and asks to keep the cords that tally feasts. The priest hesitates. Feasts are double-edged. Joy can be idolatry by another name. He turns the pendant in his fingers, sniffs unintentionally, perhaps catching marigold. His face goes briefly human. Feast for the saints, he says at last, and hands the cord back with a warning worthy of a purple tassel. Not for the old gods. She bows, almost smiling. The cords survive by changing their names. The food will taste the same. Your eyes catch on a curious object near the priest's satchel. A small, neat quipu in sober colors, with a cross tied from 2 sticks at one end. A teaching tool, you guess. Decades from now, schoolmasters will hold such things to explain numbers to new readers, because string can be patient with small hands in ways paper can't. However much the conquerors distrust quipus, they can't uninvent the comfort of touch. A friar can burn a library of cords and still find himself counting rosary beads to mark his prayers. Some habits thread deeper than conquest. A captain orders the public map quipu taken down from its niche. People murmur, low as bees. He examines it, frowns at the tampu ladder, the canal braid, the storehouse crown. Useful, he admits grudgingly, which is the bureaucratic equivalent of a hug. He hands it to the clerk to trace in ink, then, surprisingly, hangs it back. Even steel boots need to know where the road turns. You feel relief in the plaza like a long breath leaving a long day. The priest returns to the keeper with paper folded in 4s. He proposes a compromise. Certain cords registered, others surrendered. Certain categories translated into ledgers, others, he glances at the burn pile, discarded. Historians still argue whether colonial administrators ever truly read quipus, or whether they leaned on native assistants to paraphrase, writing Spanish summaries while the cords themselves were sidelined. The keeper listens, head slightly bowed, fingers worrying a plain brown pendant, the way you pick a thread on your sleeve when you can't fix the whole garment. He agrees. What else can he do? And sets aside a family cord under his cloak, with a motion so small it might be a breath. Joke 3 arrives wearing a halo and a smudge. You imagine a saint of accountants, patron of place value and zeros, watching all this and sighing, "Could we not?" while polishing a rosary made of figure-8 knots. If anyone deserves a calm cloud in heaven, it's the person who reconciles maze totals without losing the feast cord. When the soldiers leave, the plaza is left with black smudges, a smell of hot wool, and a silence that feels taller than the church wall. The keeper kneels and rubs ash between thumb and forefinger, then wipes it on the hem of his cloak. Not mourning, not exactly, more like a note. This happened. He turns to the public cord and smooths a pendant the way you comfort a child who has just seen something confusing. People drift back, brushing the cord in passing, as if reassuring it that its place remains. You sit on the low step, where you watched sandals get tallied and armies get planned, where you learned to hum uphill and downhill. The wind brings a thread of marigold scent, or maybe you summon it because your nose wants gentleness. The condor, if one is circling, keeps its opinions to itself. You think of household shopping lists, of secret purple tassels, of warriors and feasts, of priests and paper, of zeros and spacers that make silence mean something. Empires and churches are large, cords and hands are small. History is mostly the handshake between those scales. Tonight, a few chords lived, a few chords didn't. The staircase melody remains. The sum chord still knows how to hold a family of numbers. And somewhere, a baby naps into a world that will record his breath one way or another. The soldier's footprints are still crisp in the dust when a woman with braids like dark ropes touches your sleeve and tips her chin toward the hillside. No words, just the small nod of a person who knows where the quiet lives. You follow her out of sight of the plaza, past a stone wall that looks like it's practicing invisibility, and into a crease in the mountain where wind doesn't bother to visit. The path is narrow and kind to soft-footed guests. Somewhere above, a hawk draws neat circles. You hope the condor is busy judging someone else's posture tonight. She leads you to a low opening at the base of a rock face. You duck, belly brush a cool ledge, and step into air that smells like dust and old rain. The cave isn't dramatic. It's the sort of cave that understands secrets because it is one in the first place. The woman raises a small wick lamp. The flame opens a little sun in the stone. There, tucked in niches like sleeping swallows, are bundles, wool wraps, woven cloths, and within them, you soon learn, cords. She unties one wrap carefully, not with the jerk of panic, but with the slow competence of someone who has done this in dusk light for years. The quipu inside is humble. Cotton mane, alpaca pendants, dyed with practical browns and greens, a blush of red that keeps its opinions to itself. You hold your breath. After smoke and ash, seeing cords that have merely been quiet instead of destroyed feels like stumbling on a heartbeat in your palm. The woman nods to herself, like a ledger checking out under a stern audit. Then she tucks the bundle back and pulls another from the shadows. Mainstream certainty can whisper even here. Quite a number of quipus survive because people hid them. In chests, in caves, in storehouse walls, in burials, in dry coastal sands that keep cloth the way a cool pantry keeps beans. Archaeologists have found cords resting beside gourds and sandals, near storehouses and roads, often right where work was done. Some were sealed away during the colonial push to erase idolatries. Not ceremonial so much as stubbornly useful. Census cords, tax cords, household bundles saved by hands that didn't want to forget how to remember. The woman reads your face and understands without translation. You're seeing the logic of a people outlive a policy. She taps a different bundle and you notice it's not just cords. There's a folded textile as well, a tunic with bright tokapu squares marching around it like tiny flags. She flips its hem and your fingers land on a fringe of little knotted tassels that are suspiciously systematic. She grins, pleased at your surprise. Some cords live in clothes, her gesture says, in fringes and hems, where the body keeps them warm and the eye sees only beauty. It's your quirky tidbit. In a few communities, quipu-like tassels were hidden in garments, the knots riding unnoticed into plazas and churches, while their owners re-sewed the logic into the lining. You imagine a priest complimenting a tunic's bright squares while a census hums discreetly at the hem. Fashion, 1. Fire, 0. A young man slips in behind you with a gourd and sits near the entrance as lookout. The woman lights another wick and sets it by a niche that smells faintly herbal. She shows you a shallow basket, crushed chili, eucalyptus leaves, a pinch of ash. She points to the bundles, then mimes a rat's greedy nose and makes a face. Repellent, you realize. The cords are dusted and lightly smoked to keep pests and damp from having opinions. History saved by spice and smoke. Your kitchen approves. Joke one pads in wearing an apron. Your spice rack finally gets to call itself an archive. You kneel and help open a cord that bears the scuffs of hard use. Repair knots mid-pendant, a subsidiary reattached with a neat surgeon stitch, color faded to the dignity of tea. The girl beside you, maybe the woman's niece, guides your finger to a little tassel, purple as dusk. Remember it? Warning for icy passes, for scarce water, for condors particularly judgy here. Here, underground, purple means do not move unless you must. She places your hand on another tassel dyed fresh green. Feast held, promise kept. The same emoji system you met in plazas and kitchens lives here, quietly, like a language that refuses to end punctuation with a period when a soft comma would do. The woman shows you the ritual of replacement. A quipu used in daylight gets copied knot for knot, color for color, and its twin goes into the cave while the original breathes in the world. You watch as she compares a public cord to one from the niche, thumb tapping each place value like a metronome set a little slower than your heartbeat, just enough to calm you down. When she finds a mismatch, she doesn't scold the cord. She fixes it with a calm that makes your own shoulders remember how to drop. The sum cord hums its approval. Cord twins, ledger, and backup. Joke 2 slides in with a clipboard. Yes, you should also back up your life. No, your I'll remember it not is not admissible in the court of Tuesday mornings. Not every survival is as tidy as a cave cabinet. The young man fetches a textile roll and reveals a sash woven with deliberate patterns. Thin lines, thicker bars, spaces like held breaths. He wraps it around his waist and taps the bars with a rhythm that makes your ear hear numbers. Historians still argue whether some textiles carried quipu-like information in their weaves, bar and space patterns as counts, tokapu blocks as categorical flags, or whether the correspondence is mainly modern wishfulness hungry for writing where memory sat. You don't pretend to solve it. But the sash's rhythm makes your palms itch with recognition, and the woman's approving nod says the pattern tells enough for her to trust it. She pulls a final bundle from a deeper niche. Older, cotton gone the color of desert bone. This one, she explains with a whisper, belonged to her grandmother's teacher, and her teacher before that. It's a lineage of hands, not names. She places it in yours as if placing a bird. The pendants are thinner, the knots small enough to make your accountant's callus jealous. A spacer feels like a sigh. You catch the faintest perfume of marigold from long ago dye, a ghost of sunshine preserved in fiber. Somewhere in your memory, the priest smelled marigold too, and blinked like a man who remembered his mother's garden when he meant to think only about doctrine. Mainstream fact slips its arm around all this. After conquest, some communities preserved cords, both openly for mundane tasks and secretly as identity, even while Spanish officials demanded paper records. In later centuries, a few villages presented quipus as titles to land or lists of former chiefs when courts asked for proof, and not every judge knew what to do with a memory you had to touch to read. The woman shrugs with a pragmatic humor your bones admire. Sometimes the paper wins, sometimes the string refuses to lose. Joke 3 tiptoes in with cave dust on its toes. You imagine a very modern audit with with a flashlight and a clipboard and an under-caffeinated intern being told, yes, the records are in the cave behind the chili. The intern quits on the spot or converts to the Church of Sensible Knots. Either could happen. Questions drape themselves over certainty like shawls over shoulders. Were hidden chords used weekly or only polished on anniversaries to remind people who they were? Historians still argue whether underground caches were active archives or time capsules, whether garment fringes truly carried ledgers or simply wore memory like a lucky charm. The woman, who has lit 2 lamps and checked the door 3 times without seeming anxious, treats the debate like weather. Nice to discuss, not decisive for whether you plant potatoes. Before you leave, she teaches you a small ceremony. You touch the main cord's spine, thumb to wool, wool to pulse, and you hum, softly, the staircase tune you learned in the courtyard. Units, tens, hundreds. She adds the uphill note and the downhill note from the valley map. You add, almost without thinking, the tiny rhythm the captain tapped last night for, tomorrow, to, bring. The cave takes the sound and smooths it. The chords listen. Maybe you're sentimental. Maybe string just likes company. Either way, you feel the memory settle into place like a stone that finally found the right hollow. Outside, night has taken the mountain down to silhouettes. The woman pats dust from her knees and leads you back the long way, through terraces that murmur their green even in starlight. Somewhere below, the plaza's public cord hangs in its niche, thumb-polished and brave. Somewhere above, a hawk has gone to bed, leaving the condor to manage night shift. You tuck your hands into your sleeves and realize you smell faintly of smoke and chili, marigold and eucalyptus, and you think, if archives could choose their perfumes, they'd choose these. Back in the village, a dog thumps its tail against a door. A baby hiccups mid-dream. A pot lid sighs as it settles. You sit on the step where you watched soldiers frown at zeros and sandals get counted with love, and you let the cave's quiet cling to you like wool warming from skin. Not everything was saved today. Enough was. The chords underground are not hiding from time. They are saving time for when someone needs to touch it again. Morning breaks bright and matter-of-fact, like a field note written in sunlight. You follow a string of survey flags, the modern kind, plastic and neon, fluttering along a slope where stone rings and low walls dimple the ground. The wind tastes dusty sweet, a mix of eucalyptus and old maize. A team of archaeologists crouches in a rectangle of shade cast by a tarp. Trowels ping softly on pebbles. Brushes whisper. You settle on a crate labeled with coordinates and watch as the present unpacks the past with the patience of a quipucamayoc counting in his sleep. Someone lifts a flat basket from a shallow pit. The basket is full of little things that make a life. Gourd fragments, a copper fish hook, a kernel of maize gone the color of tea. And then the hush that you can hear even in wind. A bundle, small and tight, lifted in 2 hands like a bird. The conservator murmurs for water. Not to pour, just to keep the air from cracking the moment. She loosens the wrap fiber by fiber until a familiar frill peeks out. Cord. Then more cords. A main line curled like a sleeping cat. Pendants splaying in stiff arcs. You feel your shoulders rise, then deliberately drop. This is not a museum. This is the first breath of a quipu that has been holding its breath for centuries. A mainstream anchor sits down beside you. Over the past 100 years, researchers have recovered hundreds of quipus from coastal and highland sites, often near kolkha storehouses, along segments of the Kapak Nyan road system, inside administrative compounds, and in burials. Cotton cords dominate on the coast where cotton ruled. Alpaca and llama wool appear more in the highlands. Many were found tied up, ready for use or storage. Some lay beside jars of dried fish or rows of maize, the ledger sleeping next to its subject like a shepherd curled near the flock. When you saw storehouses yesterday, you were seeing the architecture of these finds. Today you see their voices. They lay the bundle on white foam and begin the unroll. Slow, slower, slowest. Dust rises in size. Someone calls out, "Subsidiary on 3," and you peer in to see the exact branching you've learned to love. A pendant sprouting a tidy footnote. A note about a note. a thought with its own little whisper. The chords are sun-faded to pale cinnamon, but here and there a color clings, green hanging on like moss after a drought, a stubborn red still proud. Your thumb itches for that accountant's callus. A quirky tidbit arrives with a grin from the fines table. One quipu comes out of a jar that smells faintly, not of marigold this time, but of fish. Anchovy oil, a conservator suggests, from coastal stores where fish, salt, and cords bunked together. The scent is weirdly domestic, as if dinner met a spreadsheet. You joke, quietly, because this is a field lab and they have standards, that you've finally found the Andean version of office fridge. A grad student gives you a look equal parts scandalized and amused, which you accept as your performance review. The site lead escorts you to a low terrace where circular stone silos cluster like a necklace of beehives. In the shade between them, a trench reveals a compacted floor, a dark line of organic stuff, spilled maize, little disasters add up, and, tucked near a post hole, 3 short cords with knots spaced in that place value territory you can now recognize by fingertip even through your eyes. You close your eyes anyway and trace the zones in your mind. Units down low, tens above, hundreds higher still. The cords are short. Pocket ledgers, you guess. Perhaps a local tally to reconcile against the bigger, travel-ready quipu that once hung in the cool of the kolka. The wind flicks your hair and you think of the sandal cord, of some cords nodding like elders, of that warning tassel you saw waving gently in a cave. Mainstream certainty keeps the rhythm. Researchers often find quipus near administrative doorways and benches, places where officials would sit and check items going in and out. At a roadside tambo, a quipu might have recorded rations issued to chaskis and work crews. In a valley center, it might track the maize flows you watched get tallied on a plaza cloth. The association is not speculative, it's architectural. You walk that architecture in your body and feel the cords slot into it like tools hanging on labeled pegs. You drift to another unit where a team maps a patch of the Great Road, compacted earth, curbstones, a shoulder where grass has muscled back in. A small quipu lay near the ditch, half silted, half sunbaked, as if dropped in a hurry and ignored because someone needed both hands to deal with something that did not fit inside a ledger. You can see the moment. The runner snagged a pendant on a thorn. The captain barked, "Leave it." The road hushed their voices, and centuries turned talk into sediment. The conservator points out repair knots you recognize from the cave cache, the same tidy field stitch a keeper used to reattach a subsidiary when life refused to pause for perfect. You grin at this little international of good fixes, caves and roads agreeing on best practices. Joke one arrives wearing a floppy hat and sunscreen. The field director teases that the site's most common artifact is, in fact, the humble sandal sole, which confirms the eternal significance of footwear budgets. You solemnly salute the sandal cord's predictive power and vow to advocate for a line item titled Unexpected Mileage. Ching. Under the next tarp, a different puzzle. A cotton-heavy quipu with pendants sorted into 2 undeniable color clusters, separated by a long, deliberate spacer. The lead raises an eyebrow. Dual inventory? Coastal versus highland goods? Or a weekday festival split? The way your household cords made gentle room for feast day chicha? Historians still argue whether color clustering marks strict categories that can be compared across regions, or whether each workshop's house style demands local translation by context. You picture the elders double tap when you got a training pendant right, and accept that the answer may keep both hands up for a while. They show you a cord with a knot spacing that seems off, wider gaps between place value zones than you expect. A specialist suggests it might scale higher, thousands, 10,000s, because the district fed a particularly gluttonous road segment, or because a festival demanded surplus. Another counters that it could be a style quirk from a known coastal workshop, gap as grammar rather than gap as magnitude. Historians still argue whether such spacing differences signal different math or just different handwriting. Your fingers want to vote both case-dependent, which is not a thrilling headline but makes your shoulders relax. A graduate student brings over a tablet with a high-res photo of a quipu from another valley. One recovered beside a row of storage rooms with drain spouts, a luxury touch for grain, its pendants stiff with salt crystals. She swipes through images of microscopic fibers, camelid guard hairs, cotton fuzz, a stray human hair carried into the weave by fingers long gone. The hair is dark, a small intimacy that the lab notes will call contaminant, and your heart calls hello. You think of the coastal woman who taught you to sing numbers. You think of the cave keeper who backs up the world with quiet twins. The screen glows. The chords under the tarp breathe. The road outside hums its dry, ancient harmony. Joke 2 unpacks a lunch. The cruise planner has a color-coded grid for units. Each trench square gets a hue. You squint and say, yellow warms, red insists, green steadies, blue surprises, brown grounds, and watch several heads snap up because you have accidentally recited the vibe of their entire field season. Someone offers you a roasted corn kernel as if you just passed an exam. A conservator shows you the ritual of rehydration, a humidification chamber, a plastic tent, trays of water, a fan that barely breathes, coaxes brittle cords back toward flexibility so knots can be read without snapping history. She uses tweezers gentler than lullabies to lift a pendant and place a small weight so the cord relaxes. You remember the elder's hand adjusting a novice's knot by half a fingernail's breadth, and feel the same balm of precision. This is not a dig, this is a bedside vigil. Mainstream truth taps your shoulder again. Some cords are pre-Inca, Wari period artifacts from centuries earlier, with structures that look like Quipus, but not exactly, as if an earlier language spoke in related grammar. Threaded histories, not single births. Historians still argue whether Wari cords are direct ancestors or cousins, whether knot writing blossomed in multiple places and converged under Inca administration. You look from cotton to alpaca, from coast to highland, from road edge to beehive storehouse, and your gut says, the land likes tools that fit its hand. Good habits evolve until someone names them. A small cheer rises from the next square. They've found a pendant with a tiny tassel, undyed but distinct, tied at the end of a root-like ladder. The field director, who absolutely read your mind about warning tassels, grins and says, if it's icy, we're going anyway, but at least the cord told us nicely. Joke 3 plants its flag. You request a tassel system for your own calendar. Purple for do not overbook, green for feast with friends, red for urgent sandals. As the afternoon cools, they spread today's cords under shade and let the wind have only their photographs. Bags are labeled, notes are inked, GPS dots bloom on a map. A runner from the modern road brings a frozen bottle that sweats like a mountain spring. Someone hums, units, tens, hundreds, without realizing it, and another answers with the uphill note you learned in the valley. You feel absurdly at home among people who treat strings like colleagues. On your way out, you pause at the trench by the road shoulder. A charm made from a shell glints in the dirt. A child once carried that, or a traveler who liked souvenirs. The road holds multitudes, boots with steel caps, sandals with rope soles, bare feet that learn the song of dust. The quipu dropped here was not lost, you decide. It was taking a long, complicated route back to daylight. You breathe in anchovy salt and wildflower dust and the faint ghost of marigold wafting from a conservator's kit. The present feels like a careful hand on your back, guiding you forward without hurry. Numbers and colors, tassels and spins, zeros that mean something and gaps that do too. Each emerges from the ground and takes your palm as if to say, you were told we were gone, but look, we were only waiting where the road remembered us. You trade dust and marigold for the cool glow of screens. Another kind of fire that people lean toward when they want to make sense of the world. A lab hums softly. Climate control set to, please relax your shoulders. On one wall, a quipu you met under a tarp now floats as a high-resolution image, every twist visible, every color coaxed back from the edge of forgetting. A grad student wheels you a stool with the reverence of a temple attendant. Sit, she whispers, as if sound might ruffle the knots through the glass. She shows you the interface, each pendant traced in a pale outline, each knot tagged with coordinates, height from the free end, type, figure 8, long knot with 4 turns, tidy single, and spin direction, S or Z, measured like a breeze. The database is a patient beast that eats details and grows useful. The mainstream fact lights up the screen. For 2 decades and more, researchers have built digital catalogs of quipus, photographing, measuring, logging fiber and color, so patterns can be compared across hundreds of artifacts. Side by side, chords from far valleys begin to talk to each other the way storehouses talk through some chords. Your fingers, unconsciously, make the place value staircase on your thigh. Units, tens, hundreds. Click, click, click. A programmer with llama wool beanie hair, statistically a coincidence, spiritually mandatory, drags 2 quipus into a split view. Watch, he says. He highlights a cluster of pendants on the left, green heavy, maze world, and a cluster on the right, similar shades, similar spacings, and the software proposes a match. Not the kind that swipes right and texts at midnight, the kind that notices both chords tally in bundles of households that come in 10s and 50s, with some chords perched like supervisors. He toggles a census table, the early colonial kind where officials tallied communities, labor units, storehouses, and your stomach does a surprised little flip. The numbers line up. An old Spanish page and an older Andean string nod across centuries like 2 people recognizing each other in a crowded station. He leans into the mic on his headset and mutters something about cosine similarity and edit distance, then glances at you. Translation. When 2 quipus look related in structure, pendant counts, sums, frequency of certain digits in certain places, the code notices, the way your hands noticed maze chords by their calm green gravity. It's not proof, he says, gentler now. It's invitation. Historians still argue whether specific matches between chords and colonial visitas, census inspections, are one-to-one or family resemblances, whether a quipu is the census or a cousin of it used by the same office. You nod. Caves and roads taught you to love cousins. Quirky tidbit time. A conservator wheels by with foam cradles, and tucked in the tray's corner, a packet of unscented dental floss. She sees you see it and laughs. Training knots, she says. New interns practice figure eights and long knots on floss before they dare move a pendant. It glides without shedding fibers, and if it falls, the lab cat, named Checksum, naturally, can't resist batting it, which conveniently trains interns not to leave anything near edges. You make a note. Even in the digital age, cats maintain their universal jurisdiction. A screen blooms with a 3D model, photogrammetry stitched from hundreds of frames, so you can rotate a pendant and watch how the long knots turns cast little shadows like terrace steps at noon. The model shows micro-abrasions where fingers tightened loops, a shine where many readings polished the wool. The technician toggles false color to exaggerate differences in spin. S twists glow cool, Z twists warm. You remember the valley map keeper using spin like an arrow, up valley, down valley, and watch the software count spin changes along a pendant. The graph looks like a heartbeat, which is exactly what these chords have been all along. A data scientist beckons and points at a line of code that makes the lab cheer when it works and groan when it doesn't. An algorithm that flags unusual gaps between place value zones, the strange spacers you touched when a quipu scaled up to 10,000s, or when a house style liked more breathing room. The program doesn't guess meanings. It spots anomalies that deserve human fingers. We're not replacing quipucamayocs, she says. We're building gentle tools. You think of the household elder tapping twice for correct, once for try again, and decide the lab is, at heart, a courtyard with outlets. Joke 1 slips in wearing blue light glasses. Someone brings a tray of snacks labeled with tassels, purple for do not eat for imaging, green for feast with friends, red for urgent, save one for the PI. You salute the tassel system's career pivot into lab management. Your stomach files a positive performance review. They open the census alignment module, the lab's polite name for matchmaking. On one side, early colonial lists of households and tribute obligations. On the other, quipu summaries with their sums and subsums grouped in familiar families. The screen maps households of 10 to pendants of 10, shows how auditors might reconcile local chords to provincial master chords you watched spread like rivers across cloth. It's not just numbers, it's structure. If a census lists 50 households in 3 clusters, 17, 13, 20. The program looks for pendants whose units' long knots add to those values, with some chords above them. When things click, the room's noise drops a notch the way plazas do before a decision. A researcher mutters, "Aini," that Andean reciprocity, as if the chords and the paper have just exchanged polite gifts. Mainstream certainty pads over like a helpful dog. Several studies have found plausible correspondences between specific quipus and recorded visitas, especially where chords were excavated right beside administrative halls or storehouses that earlier chroniclers named. The match is strongest when context hugs the chord. Place, architecture, dated layers, because numbers outside of stories are like sandals without feet, present but not convincing on their own. Historians still argue whether any match is beyond doubt. Skeptics remind the lab that different tallies can add up to similar shapes. The lab nods and keeps its verbs cautious. Suggest, align, correspond, invite. A young researcher waves you over to show a different pattern. Color frequency analysis across quipus from known regions. He's not chasing an empire-wide code so much as dialects. Green's behavior in coastal chords versus highland ones. Red's flirtations with military clusters in some provinces more than others. His heat map glows like a woven tunic. Blocks of intensity. Absences like little plazas. He points to a stripe where blue appears more than you'd expect. Trade hubs, he wonders. Or a workshop with a good indigo source. Historians still argue whether these color trends reveal categories or supply chains, or the personalities of dye masters who loved a dramatic palette. The chart doesn't mind your indecision, it simply waits for a story to comb it smooth. Quirky tidbit, the second shows up with a wheeled cart. A fiber specialist keeps labeled tufts of alpaca and cotton, also yarn spun with known S or Z twists from modern artisans, to calibrate how light reflects off each. She runs a handheld spectrometer over a quipu and then over her tufts, building a library of fingerprints. Think of it like listening to lanolin, she jokes. You nod gravely, and try not to pet the calibration alpaca tuft like a small legal therapy cloud. The programmer returns with a grin and a problem. Two chords from different valleys show the exact same odd quirk. A figure 8 used not just for ones but for fives in a specific context. Rations issued to road crews. He built a rule for it. The rule fails on a third chord. He deletes the rule and writes instead, if context il tampu plus rations cluster, then maybe 5 eals figure 8. The maybes are doing a lot of work, and that's the point. Historians still argue whether such exceptions are local conventions, workshop habits, or are misreadings disguised as patterns. The database doesn't need to win. It needs to remain polite. Joke 2 strolls in on sandals with clean new soles. The lab maintains a sandal chord of its own. A whiteboard tally of hours to be logged for grant reports. Someone has drawn a purple tassel next to week of conference travel, meaning, warning, icy administrative passes ahead. You add a green tassel to post-fieldwork feast because culture requires consistency. A camera rig snakes down from the ceiling and clicks like a tiny patient woodpecker. The tech shows you a photo stack, focus slices stitched together, so even the shallowest knot hollows are sharp. She rotates the image and you see abrasion at the exact place a reader's nail would tighten the loop. You remember the accountant's callus on the keeper's finger. Now the screen wears that callus like a shadow. Digital doesn't erase bodies, it reveals their fingerprints. Someone opens a sound file. You don't expect that. It's the coastal woman's melody, recorded in a field notebook, units, tens, hundreds sung up the scale, played while a machine learning model watches video of fingers reading a chord. Temporal attention, the coder says, tapping a graph that spikes when the finger hovers at zeros or spacers. The model learns to pause where the human pauses. You lean back, oddly moved. The machine is learning the lullaby, not to replace the singer, but to listen better when the singer is tired. Mainstream truth adds a sober footnote. The lab writes its methods in open code. It shares cautious matches and invites colleagues to poke holes. A few papers propose quipus that may encode names in the pattern of knot types and pendant ordering, phonetic possibilities tantalizing enough to keep everyone caffeinated, but no consensus holds. Historians still argue whether there is any robust, generalizable phonetic layer. You feel the usefulness of doubt. It keeps you generous, keeps you from telling chords what to say. Quirky Tidbit III arrives disguised as ergonomics. A researcher wears finger cots dusted with a powder that smells faintly of eucalyptus, the same scent you chased all day, so her touch is consistent during measurement sessions. She grins. My hands do spreadsheets now. You resist the urge to propose a line of quipu-keeper hand cream. As afternoon slants, the programmer stages a tiny demo just for you. He loads the quipu recovered near those beehive storehouses and overlays a colonial ledger that lists maize inflow and outflow for the same architectural cluster. The program proposes a pairing between a sum chord and the ledger's quarterly total. It's not perfect, no romance is. But the difference is small enough that the lab starts mumbling about spilled grain, a rat's tiny festival, or a scribe's tired quill. Someone jokes that the rat owes back taxes. Someone else adds a purple tassel to rat investigations, which is, frankly, a career path you were not warned about. Joke 3 tiptoes in with a fan's soft hum. You imagine the condor peering through the lab window, judging posture and code comments with equal gravity. You sit up straighter. You also add a comment to your own mental code. Remember snacks. Evening collects in the corners. The screens perform their slow dim. On the wall, the quipu image still hovers. Greens and reds, spacers like sighs. A long knot with 4 turns that you can count without touching. You close your eyes and listen to the lab breathe. Fans, soft clicks, a kettle far away, the almost silent tick of a timer watching over a humidification tent. You hum the staircase, the one that came from a courtyard, and hear a keyboard answer with its own tiny percussion. The chords don't mind the company. They have always liked pairs, pendant and subsidiary, sum and detail, human and machine. Place value and place value humming in 2 rooms at once. You stand where rhoda becomes horizon and yarn becomes memory, and you realize the chords have been teaching you a slow vocabulary for good goodbyes. Your thumb still knows where units live. Your breath still pauses for tens. Your chest still lifts for hundreds like a terrace step. You don't clutch the quipu, you hold it light, as if it were a bird you're convincing back to sky. Everything you've learned hums at once. Maize green, warrior red. The sandal cord that kept an army from blistered chaos. The purple tassel's polite think twice near an icy pass. Even the condor whistle remembers to keep quiet, because this is the part where silence does the heavy reading. A mainstream truth threads itself through your thoughts, firm and familiar. The Inca did not use alphabetic writing as we know it. Quipus, with their knots, colors, spins, and placements, formed the heart of imperial record-keeping. Census, tribute, labor, stores, run by trained quipucamayocs who translated the empire into touch. You repeat it to yourself without recitation, more like a weather report you trust because you can feel the breeze it describes. Your fingers slide across a long knot with 5 turns, smiling at how many times that shape has meant 5, and also enough to cook for the crew, depending on the company you keep. But what sticks tonight isn't the grand ledger of empire, it's the neon of tiny lives inside the wool. You remember the household pendant that logged chuño for winter and chicha for feast day. You can still hear the boys' solemn count of guinea pigs and the elders' double tap approval. You remember the dye master's cochineal, wine dark and shyly proud, and the marigold sunshine perfume woven into a memory so stubborn even a priest's frown couldn't burn it out of you. You remember the cave where chords slept in hems and niches, backed up like careful rumors against damp and time, dusted with chili to repel the rat who has never met a ledger he didn't want to eat. Joke 1 tiptoes in, tails itself in. Yes, even rats appreciate good data. They just have unusual processing protocols. You think of the plaza's smoke and the chords that didn't make it. Black curls, ash like moths, a keeper's fingers curling back from flame, because grief can be quiet and still be absolute. You let that ache take a seat. Then you let the map quipu sit beside it. Tampus counted like heartbeats, canal braids cool under your nail, storehouse crowns that made architecture tangible in a palm. Somewhere a captain still juggles sandals and rations. Somewhere a household still tucks a shopping list quipu into a pocket so salt won't be forgotten again. Someone hums units, tens, hundreds, not as an equation but as a lullaby. Joke 2 brings a soft grin. If adulthood had a soundtrack, it might be Remember to Bring Salt set to the staircase in D major. In the lab's chilled light, you saw screens try to be humble, models catching the shine of 1,000 thumb readings, code proposing that this chord and that census might be cousins. You liked the maybes. They felt ethical. Historians still argue whether any knot sequence can carry names or words in a general, phonetic way, whether quipus are writing, mnemonic scaffolds, or a bright third thing your dictionary doesn't yet offer a page for. You don't mind the argument living on. It means the work is breathing. The machine that learned to pause at zeros when a human finger did made you think, even in circuits, courtesy can be taught. You look down and notice your own accountant's callus is beginning. A tiny crescent where nail meets pad. The wearable diploma of having tightened more than a few long knots. The keeper would approve with exactly one nod. You imagine the coastal storyteller taking your hand again, guiding you along a pendant that isn't just a number, but a path of places, offerings, storms survived. You imagine the runner's bundle, a normal brown-green cord that says one thing to a clerk and another to a captain, and the faint, smoky tassel that smelled like eucalyptus, whispering, yes, this is the right one. Joke 3 lifts a cup. May all your urgent messages be indistinguishable from pepper purchases. You try to count how many times the chords used softness as policy. A tassel instead of a trumpet. A spacer instead of a scold. A sum chord that doesn't boast. It simply steadies its family. Even the warnings wore purple, not red. Not danger, but care. If governance can have a bedtime voice, this might be it. Reasonable, precise, oddly kind. Questions still settle among the knots like small birds at dusk. Were there story quipus sung beyond numbers? How far did map chords travel in public niches? Did every province share color logic, or did auditors learn dialects by thumb? Historians still argue whether hidden garment tassels were ledgers or lucky charms, whether wari chords are direct ancestors or cousins twice removed. Your answer tonight is neither victory nor surrender. It's an acceptance that memory likes variety, and empires, when they're smart, build tools that bend without breaking. You lift the quipu one last time, and your palm keeps a little of its warmth. You could swear the chords exhale, lanolin, dust, a ghost of marigold, and for a heartbeat you believe objects practice gratitude. Maybe that's just you, projecting courtesy back onto what taught you to touch patiently. You coil the pendants without hurrying, straighten a stray fringe, and feel the system click into its small, satisfying geometry. Main chord smooth as a sentence, pendants aligned like quiet clauses, subsidiaries glancing up like footnotes that know they matter. When you step away, the world is still tied together. Grass bridges humming, sandals counting the day in twine, household feasts making green tassels flutter, caves keeping duplicates in the dark for when the light forgets itself. The chords remain what they were, fragile, humming echoes of vanished voices that have the decency not to vanish all the way. And you remain what you became, a person who can fall asleep to numbers because you finally met the people inside them. You breathe out, long and even, a last figure 8 of air, and somewhere a sum chord nods that the totals balance, labor against feast, caution against courage, silence against speech, soft thread against high stone. The empire is gone. The memory is not. You tuck the last knot with 2 fingers, gentle as a good night. Word count. Mundus 1073. The nightlight softens, and the story loosens its laces. You let your shoulders tip toward the pillow and invite your breath to move like the valley's old road, steady, unhurried, familiar even in the dark. The chords you touched a moment ago step back, but they don't disappear. They fade into a warm backdrop, like a shawl you forgot you were wearing. The yellow of maize, the red of banners, the green of terraces grow quieter, their colors turning to comfortable grays you can lean on. A tassel stirs once in a drowsy breeze, a purple reminder that the path is gentle tonight, a green promise that there will be a feast of small joys tomorrow. You count in the way you've learned to count. Not sheep, but steps. Tip where the units live, up one terrace for tens, another for hundreds. Each pause is a soft landing, a spacer between thoughts. If your mind finds a knot, some stubborn loop of worry, you don't yank, you smooth. The knot eases a little and agrees to be read later. In the distance, bridges hum, as bridges do, as if the mountains themselves purr when the last sandals cross. A kitchen door you remember swings slowly in memory. A cup taps a stone rim. Someone hums the staircase tune at half volume. Someone else adds the uphill note a shade lower. A promise that tomorrow's climb will be kind. Even the condor, officious inspector of posture, decides you've done enough for today and signs off with a dignified nod. The cave is cool, the storehouse is full. The map cord in its niche sways just enough to say, yes, the road will still be there in the morning. You let the sum cords gather what you carried. The tasks, the questions, the little embarrassments, the 3 jokes you told yourself so the day would loosen its grip. They total themselves without you handling a single digit. Your only job is to rest. Place your palm on the main cord, your own breath, and follow it down, past the pendants of shoulder and chest, down to the quiet knot of sleep. Tie it gently. There. Good.